Chapter 44-46. Hearing this, Hao held their hands and said seriously, "You two have to remember that although Uncle Ning is very good to us, you can't tell him our secret. Do you understand?" Mu Chen nodded and said, "I know." Yu beamingly smiled, and just like a little fox, she also nodded her head, Yu also knows. Big Brother had told us before, we must guard against people, Yu remembers. Yes, you can't be unguarded, but you can't have the heart to harm others. Hao smiled and taught again. Yes, Yu remembers. The little one nodded with a smile. You can't take out the things in the space casually. You don't have to let others know. We have the space. You can't even tell Uncle Ning. You can't tell anyone about the cultivation method and martial arts that Big Brother taught you. He reminded them again. Yes. The two little guys nodded and listened carefully. Well, you two are tired. Go to bed early today. He acted like a little adult. He touched the two little guys' heads and let them go to bed first. Then Big Brother should go to bed early too. The two said. Okay. Hao watched them take off their clothes and go to bed. He helped them pull up the quilt and then turned outside and went to the room next door. Because they had to cultivate, there couldn't be too many servants walking around in the courtyard. Therefore, when they wanted to arrange for servants to come over and take care of them today, he refused. When he returned to the room, he didn't go to bed directly. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the bed and cultivated. He was the Big Brother. He was older than his younger siblings. Moreover, he remembered many things. However, there were some things he didn't tell the two little ones. There were no cultivators on this continent. In fact, he was afraid. He was afraid that his parents wouldn't be able to find this place, and he was also afraid that they wouldn't be able to go back. Fortunately, he knew the cultivation method and there were many cultivation books in the space. Therefore, he could only work hard to cultivate, hoping to become stronger so that he could find the way back with his younger siblings. The next morning, Pan Ning took the children out of the house in a carriage. Compared to the three children who sat in a regular distance, her children were like naughty children. Even when they sat in the carriage, they would not stop moving. The little boy rolled his eyes, and looking at Yu, who was sitting properly, he couldn't help but move towards her side, and asked with a beaming smile, "Younger sister Yu, I am also Big Brother, do you want to call me Big Brother?" Yu blinked her beautiful eyes and looked at the little brother who was older than her. After thinking for a bit, she sweetly called out, "Big Brother Fu Qing." Hearing that soft and sweet voice calling him Big Brother Fu Qing, the little boy jumped up in excitement. "I'm a big brother too. I'm a big brother now." The little boy was very happy. He looked at Mu Chen expectantly and asked, "Brother Mu Chen, do you want to call me Big Brother?" Mu Chen glanced at him and looked away. "No." "Ah. Why? I'm obviously older than you." He scratched his head and looked at him with a puzzled expression. "If you don't want it, then don't." Mu Chen was also a little arrogant. Seeing this, Fu Qing thought for a bit and took out a candy from his pocket. "Call me Big Brother, and I'll give you candy." "I don't want it." Mu Chen glanced at her and then looked away. Chapter 44-47. When Pan Wuxia saw that his father had asked him to sit down, he obediently ran to his side and leaned against him while looking at Mu Chen with his pair of eyes. Pan Ning first brought them to the city for breakfast, then took them out for a stroll around the city. He also brought the children back to buy some things. They only returned to the Pan residence in the evening. After sending the three children back to the southern courtyard, Pan Ning paused and said, "How, it's not convenient for you to have no servants here. How about this? I'll call 17 over to follow you." He then added, 17 is the secret guard who followed me to the courtyard to look for you that day." Hao thought for a moment and nodded. Okay. You guys should rest early today. Study with Qing tomorrow. Pan Ning smiled and said, as for other matters, you don't have to worry about them. I'll help you find out. Thank you. Hao bowed to him. Pan Ning nodded and then left first. The three children entered the room. Not long after, they heard a voice from outside. Young Master Hao, I'm here to report. A young man in ordinary green stood in the courtyard and reported. The door opened and the three children walked out. Hao looked at the man in the courtyard and asked, Did Uncle Ning tell you everything? Yes, young Master Hao. From today onwards, 17 will serve the two young masters and young mistress and listen to their orders. He said respectfully. Hao glanced at him and didn't say much. He just told him the rules. If you stay here, you have to abide by my rules. Without our permission, no one is allowed to enter the courtyard. In addition, you can wait outside the courtyard. If there's anything, we'll call for you. Yes. He replied respectfully. You may leave. Hao said. Thus, after bowing, 17 left the room. At night, the three children did not go to bed early. Instead, under Hao's guidance, they sat cross-legged on the bed to cultivate. 17, who was guarding outside the courtyard, looked at the room with the lights on. His eyes flashed, and he could not help but think of what the second young master had told him in the evening. Second young master had instructed him to stay by their side and take care of them. He had also instructed him to do more and speak less. In the southern courtyard, no matter what the three children did or said, he had to keep an eye on them. However, he was not to speak of it to outsiders. Even if the masters of the Pan family asked, he was not to say much. Thinking of the second young master's instructions, he also knew that these three children had an extraordinary background. Naturally, he did not dare to be careless. In the room, Hao, who was cultivating with the two little ones, slowly opened his eyes in the middle of the night. He looked at the two little ones and called out softly. Chen, you, When the two of them heard his voice, they opened their eyes and looked at him. The moment they opened their eyes, there was clarity in their eyes instead of confusion and sleepiness. Big brother, what's wrong? You, asked while looking at him with her pair of beautiful big eyes. Chapter 44-48. Okay. The two nodded. You, smiled and said, Big brother, if you, can't wake up tomorrow, you must wake us up. Hao, smiled and patted her head. I will. You can sleep at ease. It doesn't matter if you forget to wake up tomorrow. I'll wake you up. You, answered happily and yawned. She was a little sleepy. Let's sleep early. Hao, said and left after letting them lie down. The next morning, before the sky was bright, Hao, woke up Mu Chen and Mu Yu. The three of them practiced boxing in the courtyard. Compared to Hao's punches, Mu Chen and Mu Yu's punches were weak. However, they were still young, so Hao didn't have high requirements for them. He only let them practice until they were familiar with it. As for the rest, he would talk about it later. After sweating profusely and bathing, the three children ate breakfast and were about to go out when they saw the dignified Pan Wuxia trotting towards them. Big brother Hao, little brother Chen, little sister Yu, I'm here to take you to school. The little guy bounced over, followed by a boy and a girl who were 2 or 3 years older than him. The girl was about 6 or 7 years old, and the boy seemed to be the same age as Hao. The two walked over and looked at the three with curiosity in their eyes. Brother Qing, are they the three people my father was talking about? Asked the boy. He walked up and looked at Hao, and the others. It's them. This is. Pan Wuxia was about to speak but was interrupted by the boy. I'm Pan Bowen, and this is my sister, Pan Shui. My father is the eldest son of the Pan family. When we came back yesterday, my father already mentioned you. He said with a smile. You're Xianyuan Hao. You two are twins, Xianyuan Mu Chen and Xianyuan Mu Yu. Big brother Bowen, big sister Shua, you can call me Yu. The little one showed a sweet smile and looked at the two of them obediently. This is for you. The little girl with red face took out a wooden doll and handed it over to Yu. She seemed to be somewhat shy, and spoke in a low voice, but when she heard Yu, calling her big sister Shua, her pair of eyes flashed, and she was very happy. Yu's eyes lit up, and taking the gift she handed over, she said with a smile, Thank you big sister Shua. I also have gifts for you. Pan Bowen looked at Hao, and Chen, and said. He took out two small rectangular boxes from his arms and handed them to them. These are 2 brushes. Daddy bought them with me yesterday. They are for you. Thank you. Hao and Mu Chen took it and thanked him. Let's go to school. If you're late, great-grandpa will slap you. Pan Bowen said as he and Pan Buching led them to the school. The little girl with a red face shyly held Yu's hand. Seeing Yu smiling, she couldn't help but smile as well, and even her footsteps became lighter. When the children arrived at the school, Shua originally wanted to sit with Yu, but when she saw Mu Chen, who looked exactly like Yu, but had a sullen face, sitting next to Yu, she could only find a seat herself. Chapter 44-49. The old man walked in slowly with his hands behind his back. He glanced at the children who were sitting up straight in an orderly manner, then coughed lightly and asked, Do you all know each other? Yes, the children answered. The old man then walked down and said to Bowen, who was sitting on the left in front, Write down the book I asked you to memorize last time today. Yes, great-grandfather, Bowen answered in an orderly manner. He did not look back but began to grind the ink and write from memory. Shua, this is the writing you have to practice today. The old man gave her homework and walked over to Bo Ching. Practice your writing today. The homework is here. After giving the 3 children their homework, he walked over to Hao, and the other 2 and asked, Have you learned it before? What do you know? Hao thought for a moment and said, I don't really remember, but I remember that father and mother taught me before. Hearing this, the old man paused for a moment and asked, Then do the 3 of you know how to write your names? Yes, the 3 of them said in unison. Write it down and let me see. He pulled over a chair and sat between the 3 of them. He saw the 3 children pick up the brush, dip it in some ink, and seriously write down their names on the paper. Then, they handed it over one by one for him to see. Looking at the 3 names written by the 3 children, he looked at the 3 of them with some surprise. Hao's handwriting had already begun to show its edge, and although the 2 younger ones wrote stroke by stroke, it was still regular and neat. It did not seem like the handwriting that they would write at their age. After all, they were such young children. However, when he thought of the unique temperament of these 3 children, he felt that it was not surprising. Your writing is not bad. Today, I'll test you first and see what you know. He looked at the 3 children, thought for a moment, and tested them one by one. However, what he did not expect was that this school exam was full of surprises. The 3 children knew more than he expected, especially Hao, who could memorize a book he had never read. His photographic memory really shocked him. Of course, Old Man Pan would never have guessed that it was because Hao, was an immortal. His spiritual power was not something a mortal could compare to. Moreover, he had been intelligent since he was young, so he could learn twice the result with half the effort. After a whole morning, Old Man Pan couldn't help but feel a sense of appreciation for talent. He discovered that not only Hao, but even the 2 children who weren't even 3 years old had extremely good memories. They understood with just a hint, and their comprehension abilities were even more astonishing. That's all for today, you can go back. Do your homework well. I'll check on you one by one tomorrow. The old man told them to go back first. The next few days passed as usual. However, learned things extremely quickly. Even Bowen could not catch up to his speed. Moreover, not only did he learn to read and write, but he also learned to paint. On this day, after the old man left school, he walked slowly to the front and met Pan Hong. After Pan Hong bowed, he asked, "Why haven't I seen Pan Ning recently? What has he been busy with these days?" Chapter 44-50. Hearing this, the old man frowned. "What's he doing there?" "I don't know." Pan Hong paused, then asked, "Grandfather, how are and the others doing?" Grandfather Pan glanced at him. "They're naturally intelligent and have a photographic memory. They can be called demonic geniuses." Pan Hong's eyes flashed. "All three children are like that?" "Yes." The old man nodded and sighed. "An ordinary family wouldn't be able to raise such an outstanding child. I really don't know who they are. I'm getting more and more curious." Pan Hong smiled and said, "Perhaps, we will find out one day." To be honest, he was also curious about the origins of the three children. However, they were brought back by his brother. Even if he was curious, he didn't think of investigating in secret. After all, he believed that his brother had a sense of propriety. When it was time to let them know, they would know. "Yes, I heard from your father yesterday that His Majesty seems to want to send you on a long trip." Grandfather Pan asked. "There was talk of it, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. If you have to go on a long trip, you have to arrange for people to follow you. Safety is the most important thing." He patted him on the shoulder and said, "I'll go back and rest first. If you encounter something you can't solve, discuss it with your family." "Grandfather, don't worry. I will." Pan Hong said and watched him leave before heading to the backyard. The days passed unknowingly. In the blink of an eye, and the others had been in the Pan family for more than 3 months. Compared to Mu Chen and Mu Yu, Er's cultivation improved faster. However, in this place, the spiritual energy was scarce. Although there were pills to improve strength in the space, he didn't dare to use them casually. Early in the morning, the Pan family was sitting in a circle eating breakfast. It was peaceful and quiet. However, they were caught off guard by a sudden piece of news. "Not good, not good. Old master, something happened to first young master." The steward hurried in to report. Behind him, 2 secret guards covered in blood carried the bloodied Pan family's first young master, Pan Hong. Grandfather Pan, who was eating breakfast, stood up abruptly when he heard the housekeeper's report. The bowl in his hand fell to the ground. His heart pounded. What happened? What happened? However, as soon as he finished speaking, he saw his eldest grandson being carried by the secret guard. He felt his blood rush to his head and his entire body swayed. He almost lost his balance. "Husband! Father! Father!" The expressions of Pan Hong's wife and child changed abruptly, and they hurriedly ran forward. However, when they saw the wounds on his body and the blood all over his body, tears fell from their eyes. How could this be? How could this be? "Husband, husband!" Hong, Pan Fu helped old Master Pan to the front. When he saw Pan Hong covered in injuries, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. "Quickly get a doctor. Quick!" Pan Ning woke up late today and didn't have breakfast with them, but after hearing the news of his big brother's accident, he quickly rushed over. As for Mu Chen and Mu Yu, who were in the southern courtyard, they were used to eating by themselves, so they didn't know what had happened earlier. The servants of the Pan residence also didn't tell them about the eldest young master's accident. After all, in everyone's eyes, they were just 3 children. Chapter 44-51. Seeing the doctor shaking his head as he walked out, Old Man Pan's entire body swayed and his vision turned black. He fainted. "Father, father." Old Man Pan was shocked and quickly supported him while shouting, "Doctor, doctor. Doctor, quickly take a look at my grandfather." Pan Ning quickly walked out and pulled the doctor who had just walked out of the room. The doctor sighed in his heart and returned to check Old Man Pan's pulse. He then took out some medicine and placed it under Old Man Pan's nose for him to smell. He then pressed on Old Man Pan's Renjong point and said, "Old master is fine. He just fainted from the shock. He's getting on in years, so you should send him back to rest first. Is there really no hope for Hong, or? Doctor, doctor, you must save him. You must save him." Old Man Pan woke up and held the doctor's hand as he pleaded. Sigh. Eldest young master's lungs have been injured, and he has lost too much blood. Not only that, but the tendons in his legs have also been severed. This person is trying to kill him. With such serious injuries, this old man is really powerless. The doctor sighed and withdrew his hand. He cupped his hands towards them and turned to walk out. Hearing the doctor's words, the Pan family's faces turned pale with grief and sorrow. Pan Hong's wife covered her mouth and sobbed beside the bed. How could this be? How could this be? Old Man Pan sat down and muttered in disbelief. Pan Ning clenched his fists and refused to give up. "I'll go to the city to find other doctors." "Father, immediately go to the palace to explain the situation to the emperor and ask for an imperial doctor to treat Big Brother." "Yes, yes. I'll go to the palace to ask for an imperial doctor immediately." Old Man Pan heard Pan Ning's words and recovered from the shock. He quickly stood up and walked out. "I'll go to the palace to ask for an imperial doctor immediately. Madam, please send grandfather back to the courtyard to rest." Pan Ning looked at his wife and said, "No, I want to stay here. I'm not leaving." Old Man Pan said, unwilling to leave. He was worried that if he left, he wouldn't be able to see his grandson for the last time. "I'll stay here and take care of him. If all of you go out, someone will have to look after him." Pan Ning's wife said softly. "All right, then I'll leave the manor to you. I'll go out now. As for sister-in-law, you." Pan Ning gestured and looked at his sister-in-law who was sobbing in the inner room. "You go. I'll stay here," she said as she watched him leave. She poured a cup of water for the old man and went into the inner room. She crouched down and hugged her, comforting her. "How? Who was it that did this?" Bold Pan they. Of course, the children of the Pan family were also sensible. Although they were brought back to the courtyard, they didn't say a single word, but tears continuously fell from their eyes. Pan Bo Ching, who was usually the most mischievous, saw Bowen and Xue crying silently. He couldn't help but wipe his tears. He pursed his lips and said, "Big brother, little sister, don't cry. My father and grandfather have already gone to find a doctor. Uncle will be fine." Chapter 44-52. Sister, don't cry, don't cry. Fu Qin did not know how to coax people. Seeing her crying more and more sadly, and his elder brother also had his head lowered, he could not help but cry as well. He wiped his tears and ran out. Hao and the other two were still in the courtyard and had not been discharged. In addition, the south courtyard was rather secluded. The servants in the front were moving about chaotically, but the south courtyard was still quiet and elegant. 17 was waiting outside. Because he had heard the news from the other secret guards, he was also anxious and worried at this time. How was the eldest master now? Just as he was thinking, he saw Fu Qin crying and wiping his tears as he walked over. He quickly went forward and called out, "Master Qin, what's wrong with you?" Fu Qin glanced at him and ignored him. He continued to cry as he walked towards the south courtyard. Seeing this, 17 hurriedly came to the entrance of the southern courtyard and said, "Young Master Hao, young Master Qing is here." Sob sob, sob sob. Fu Qing walked in as he cried. He stood in front of the three people and could not stop crying. In the courtyard, Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu could not help but look at each other. Yu, could not help but ask, "Brother Fu Qing, why are you crying? Did Uncle Ning hit you?" Sob sob. "No, no," sob sob. Fu Qing sobbed as he cried. "Then what's wrong with you?" Mu Chen asked. He really could not bear to see this boy, who was a head taller than him, crying non-stop. Sob sob. My uncle is going to, sob sob. He's going to die, sob 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 that he said intermittently, sob sob. I told big brother and Shui, little sister Shui, that uncle will be fine, but uncle has a lot of blood on his body, and he won't wake up. The servants in the residence are all saying that uncle is going to die, sob sob sob. I don't want uncle to die, I don't want uncle to die, sob sob. Hearing this, Mu Chen and Mu Yu were stunned. Uncle Hong, who had a cold face but would send them things, was going to die. Hao frowned as his cold little face darkened. He looked at 17 who was standing at the side and asked, "What happened?" Eldest young master was ambushed on his way back. The bodyguards accompanying him were all killed. The secret guards tried their best to save him, but I heard that his injuries were very serious. The doctor said that he might not live past tonight. 17 quickly told him what he knew. Hearing this, Hao was silent and didn't say anything. No one knew what he was thinking. Boo-hoo. Big brother and Shui, little sister Shui, kept crying. I'm scared too. Boo-hoo. Fu Qing sobbed softly. Big brother Bo Qing, don't cry, Uncle Hong will be fine. Yu tiptoed and lightly patted his head. Chen Yu Hao looked at the two of them. Go and accompany Bowen and Shui. Where's big brother? Mu Chen looked at him and asked. Hao thought about it and said, I'll go take a look at Uncle Hong. Okay. Mu Chen nodded and said to Bo Qing, don't cry. Boys shouldn't cry. 17, bring them over. Hao looked at 17 and ordered. Yes. 17 responded and left with the three little ones. Chapter 44-53. Hao Pan Ning was a little surprised to see him here. However, he was in a hurry to bring the doctors to treat his elder brother, so he did not stop walking. As he walked forward, he said, something happened in the residence. If you need anything, look for 17 first. Hao followed beside him and said, I heard that something happened to Uncle Hong, so I wanted to come and take a look. Elder brother was ambushed on the way back. His condition is not good. I'm bringing the doctors to treat him now. As Pan Ning spoke, his footsteps were hurried. He said to the dozen or so doctors who were jogging behind him, everyone, please walk faster. The doctors behind him were in a hurry and were panting slightly. One of the fatter ones was sweating a lot. He was wiping his sweat and panting as he jogged to follow the crowd. When they arrived at the courtyard, before they could catch their breath, they were invited in for a diagnosis. However, after entering, they all came out shaking their heads. There are too many injuries and they have hurt his lungs. Forgive us for not being able to do anything. As they spoke, they did not dare to ask for a consultation fee and left on their own. The dozen or so doctors came quickly and left quickly. Pan Ning did not even have the strength to stop them as he watched them leave. He looked at his elder brother on the bed and stood there in a daze. His eyes could not help but redden. Outside, Hao listened to the doctor's words and was silent for a while. Just as he was about to walk in, he saw Pan Ning's father hurrying over with two old men. He retreated to the side and watched them enter before following in. "I've brought 2 imperial doctors. Quick, please save my eldest son." Pan Ning's father hurriedly said and pulled the 2 imperial doctors forward. "Let us catch our breath first." The 2 old men who were pulled and hurriedly were out of breath. After they steadied themselves, they took a few deep breaths before looking at the person on the bed. They were no strangers to Pan Hong. However, when they saw Pan Hong lying on the bed with a pale face and an extremely weak breath, the 2 imperial doctors looked at each other and sighed in their hearts. With just one look, they knew that young Master Pan was most likely doomed. Even so, the 2 of them did not say much. They just went forward and seriously checked his pulse. The members of the Pan family watched from behind with their hearts in their mouths. Due to their nervousness, their palms were sweating. More than 10 of the best physicians in the city had come, and all of them had said that there was no hope. Now, they could only place their hopes on these 2 imperial physicians. If even they couldn't do anything about it, then it was really. How saw that the old master was so nervous that his body was trembling. The others were also worried. They looked at the 2 imperial physicians with nervous and hopeful gazes. He pursed his lips and looked away. In his memory, his mother had taught him some simple medical skills. In addition, he could feel that Pan Hong's aura was extremely weak from the moment he came in. His face was also faintly covered with a layer of death aura. A mortal's aura was so weak that he could die at any time. If there was no divine medicine, it could be said that he was dead for sure. He had life-saving medicinal pills in his space. However, if a person who had been sentenced to death survived because of his medicinal pills, he thought that there would be a lot of trouble in the future. Moreover, if they knew that he had a life-saving pill, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't become greedy. Chapter 44-54. No one in the room made a sound because of the imperial physician's diagnosis. The 2 imperial physicians shook their heads and said, "There are a total of 27 wounds on eldest young master's body. The most serious one was a sword stab to the heart. He's just hanging on with one breath. He won't be able to make it through tonight. You'd better prepare for his funeral." They sighed and shook their heads. Just as they were about to walk out, one of the imperial physician's legs was hugged by eldest madam, who had fallen to the side. "No, my husband won't die. I beg you to save him. He won't die. He won't abandon us. I beg you, please save him." Eldest madam cried and begged, refusing to let them go. In her opinion, if they left as well, then no one would be able to save her husband. Her pleas were filled with grief and sorrow. Even the 2 imperial physicians could not help but feel sorrowful at this moment. Pan Hong was in the prime of his life and was highly regarded by the emperor. Now that he was in this state, it really made people sigh. "Eldest madam, please restrain your grief," they said helplessly as they watched the woman cry herself to death. In the end, she fainted. "Sister-in-law! Sister-in-law!" Pan Ning and his wife quickly went forward to support her. The imperial physician looked at her and said, "She's too sad. Send her back to rest. We'll take our leave first." The 2 of them said and walked out. They still had to report Pan Hong's condition to the emperor. Old Master Pan's body swayed and his face was as white as paper. Just as he was about to fall, Hao-er supported him. Father Pan sat in a chair in a daze. He seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. "Madam, send sister-in-law back and take good care of her." Pan Ning forced himself to stay awake and let his wife send her back first. When he saw his wife and servants supporting his sister-in-law leave, he took a deep breath and looked at his elder brother on the bed with grief in his eyes. Old Master Hao-er supported him as he trembled to the bedside. Looking at his dying grandson, he couldn't help but cry. He said in a choked voice, why can't I be the one lying here instead of dying before my grandson? Unable to bear the impact of this grief, the old man, who had been holding on for a long time, finally collapsed. His body twitched, and his mouth was slightly crooked. Saliva flowed out from the corner of his mouth, shocking the father and son of the Pan family. Grandfather. Father. Father Pan and Pan Ning quickly stepped forward to support him, fearing that something would happen to him. Father Pan hurriedly said, "Quickly send your grandfather back and let the doctor take a good look at him. Your eldest brother is already like this, we can't let anyone fall in our house." Hao watched as the room turned into a mess after the old master collapsed. He retracted his gaze, and with a flick of his hand, he stuffed a pill between his fingers into the mouth of the dying Pan Hong. He moved so quickly that no one noticed that he had stuffed a pill into Pan Hong's mouth. After old Master Pan was sent back to the courtyard, the room became quiet again. Old Master Pan turned around and walked to the bedside with heavy steps. Looking at his son who was on the verge of death, he couldn't help but cover his face and cry softly. Chapter 44-55. When Father Pan heard his words and thought of Pan Hong's injuries, he wiped away his tears and said, "The doctors all said that he won't live. They only treated his wound simply. Even if he can't live, I have to let him go with dignity." Hao helped by the side. He asked someone to bring a basin of water and help to clean the wounds again. When he saw Pan Ning's father taking out medicine to treat Pan Hong's wounds, he hurriedly handed over the medicine he had prepared. "Grandpa Pan, use this medicine of mine. It's very good for external injuries," Hao said as he handed the medicine bottle to him. Father Pan glanced at him and nodded. He didn't say anything else as he carefully applied medicine on Pan Hong's wounds and bandaged them up. Hao frowned slightly as he looked at the broken tendons on his feet. He could take out healing pills for him to consume, and he could also take out medicine to treat his external injuries. However, there was nothing he could do to help with his broken hamstring. If his mother was here, he thought that there would be a way. Unfortunately, he didn't know where his parents were. Father. Pan Ning walked in and saw his father sitting by the bed with a sorrowful face and Hao standing at the side. His footsteps paused for a moment before he walked in. "Father, let me guard big brother here." He was really worried that he wouldn't be able to withstand the impact and collapse. "No, I want to guard here." Pan Ning's father shook his head, unwilling to leave. Seeing this, Pan Ning sighed softly and said to Hao, Hao, you go back first." Hao responded. He glanced at Pan Hong on the bed before turning around and walking out. Hao didn't return to the courtyard directly. Instead, he went to Bowen and the others. When he entered the courtyard, he saw Mu Chen and Mu Yu sitting around the stone table with Bowen, Bo Qin and Xue. 17 was standing at the side. "Big brother." Yu saw him and hurriedly ran to his side. She looked up at him worriedly and asked, Big brother, how is Uncle Hong? Is he better?" Hao looked at his sister beside him and couldn't help but reveal a doting smile. He reached out and patted her little head. "Don't worry, Uncle Hong will be fine. He's just too tired and slept for a while." Hearing this, the eyes of Yu shone, and she happily smiled. "That's good, like this big brother Bowen and big sister Xue won't be without a father." Hearing Hao's words, 17 sighed in her heart. They were still young and did not understand how serious the injury was. His brother, who was also a secret guard, told him that even the imperial physician had come and said that the eldest young master was beyond saving. Furthermore, he would not be able to survive the night. "Big brother Bowen, big sister Xue, you don't need to worry. My big brother said that Uncle Hong will be fine, he is just tired, and will be fine after sleeping," Yu said while looking at them with a beaming smile. Snow's red and swollen eyes held a glimmer of hope, while Bowen lowered his head and said nothing. Because of this incident, the adults in the residence also collapsed one after another. Hao, and the other two stayed here to accompany the children of the Pan family. It was only at night that Hao, and the other two returned to the southern courtyard. Chapter 44-56. Yes. Hao responded and said, "We are indebted to their family. There are medicines in the space that can save his life, so I secretly fed him one." Hao, continued, "However, the tendons in his legs were severed. I'm afraid that after he recovers, his legs will be crippled." "Big brother, didn't you say that mother's medical skills are amazing? When we find father and mother in the future, won't we get mother to treat Uncle Hong?" Yu blinked her beautiful eyes, her little face full of innocence. If mother was here, his injuries wouldn't be a big problem. However, mother isn't here now, so it's hard to say what will happen in the future. As Hao spoke, he saw the two of them looking at him and continued, "However, it's already considered good that he's still alive. Those imperial physicians had already said that he would definitely die. Now that he's still alive, it shouldn't matter even if he can't stand up. Compared to death, at least he was still alive." In his opinion, this was already considered lucky. Great-grandfather Pan couldn't take the blow and collapsed. He probably won't be able to teach during this period of time. From tomorrow onwards, you two can study on your own. If you encounter anything you don't understand, just ask me. Hao reminded them. Yes, yes. The two little ones nodded in response, looking very obedient. This night was difficult for the Pan family. Other than the collapsed great-grandfather and great-madam, the rest of the Pan family, including the children, were gathered in the side room. They called Bowen and Shui because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to see their father for the last time. The two children stayed by the bed, their small hands holding their father's large hands. They didn't dare to cry or make a fuss. They just kept looking at him. In their hearts, they hoped that their father was just as Hao said. He fell asleep because he was tired. Perhaps he would wake up at dawn tomorrow. All the powers in the imperial capital had heard about what happened to the Pan family. They knew that the Pan family's eldest young master, Pan Hong, was ambushed on his way back. His injuries were so severe that even the imperial physicians said that he wouldn't live past tonight. On one hand, they were shocked that someone dared to make a move on the Pan family's eldest young master. On the other hand, they felt sorry for Pan Hong. Such an outstanding person was going to die at such a young age. It really made one sigh. In the palace, after the imperial physician reported the situation and said that Pan Hong would not survive the night, the emperor flew into a rage and ordered that the person behind the ambush must be found. When night fell, the emperor left the palace with 12 guards and went to the Pan family. "Old master, second young master, His Majesty is here." The housekeeper quickly ran into the courtyard to report. Hearing this, Father Pan and Pan Ning quickly went out to greet him. As soon as they came out, they saw a middle-aged man walking over with steady steps, followed by more than 12 inner palace guards. "Your subjects greet your Majesty." The father and son of the Pan family stepped forward and knelt on one knee. "No need to be so courteous." The emperor stepped forward to support Father Pan. Looking at Father Pan, who had aged 10 years overnight, he couldn't help but sigh softly and said, "This emperor is here to see Pan Hong." "Many thanks, Your Majesty," the father and son of the Pan family said as they led him into a side room. When he came to the inner room, he saw Pan Hong's son and daughter standing by the bed with tears in their eyes. His footsteps paused. He originally wanted to take a step forward, but he couldn't. He just stood 3 meters away from the bed and looked at them. Chapter 44-57. After a long while, he stepped forward and walked to the bedside. He glanced at the person on the bed before shifting his gaze to the two children. "What are your names?" the emperor asked as he looked at the two children. Your Majesty, my name is Pan Bo One. My name is Pan Shui. Shui replied timidly when she saw her brother speak. Hearing this, the emperor nodded. He patted the two children's heads and said, I will catch the person who harmed your father. He thought that when he returned, he would have to think carefully about how to compensate the Pan family and the two children. After all, Pan Hong had been ordered by him to go on a long journey. The fact that he had been killed on this trip was probably related to what he had done. He didn't stay in the Pan family for long. After comforting the Pan family, he left quietly. After all, with his status, it wasn't easy for him to take the risk to come out at night. After sending off the emperor, the Pan father and son continued to keep watch in the side room. However, in the middle of the night, the two children fell asleep by the side of the bed. After Pan Ning ordered someone to send the children back to rest, he suddenly noticed that his pale-faced brother's breathing seemed to have gradually stabilized. He was stunned and his heart tightened. He was afraid that it was just his imagination. He quickly walked to the outer room and held his father's hand. Father, big brother is. Before he could finish, Pan Ning's father, who had been sitting in a daze, suddenly stood up and interrupted him. Did your big brother die? He asked in a trembling voice as tears welled up in his eyes. No, father, come and see. Big brother's breathing seems to have stabilized. Come and see. Pan Ning excitedly pulled him to the side of the bed. Pan Ning's father went forward to take a look. He couldn't help but be stunned. He was so emotional that he couldn't speak. This, doctor. Quick. Get a doctor. That night, the lights in the courtyard were lit all the way until the next day. When First Madam woke up at dawn, she looked at the sky outside and sat in a daze. Her expression was sorrowful. In the next moment, she covered her face and cried bitterly. When Second Madam came in and saw her crying, she hurriedly went forward. Sister-in-law, what happened to you? Chiu-yi, I didn't even get to see him for the last time. Woo. She covered her face and cried bitterly. Her cries were so sorrowful that it made one's heart ache. When Second Madam heard this, she hurriedly said, Sister-in-law, don't cry. Eldest uncle is fine. Eldest uncle is still alive. What? First Madam, who had been covering her face and crying bitterly, stopped crying when she heard this. She stood up agitatedly, grabbed her hand, and asked in a trembling voice, what did you say? Is my husband still alive? Second Madam hurriedly told her about what happened last night. As soon as Second Madam finished speaking, she cried and laughed as she hurriedly put on her coat and ran out. At this time, several doctors were taking Pan Hong's pulse in the room. When they felt the strong beating pulse, they all widened their eyes in shock as if they had seen a ghost. Their faces were full of disbelief as they muttered, this is a miracle, this is a miracle. How did he survive with such injuries? This is simply unbelievable. When Pan Ning and Pan Father heard this, their faces were filled with excitement. Pan Ning asked with uncertainty, Doctor, is my big brother really okay? Did he really survive? Chapter 44-58. That's right. I've never seen anyone who could survive with such injuries. It's impossible to survive with such injuries. When we left yesterday, he was clearly hanging on to his last breath. But now, his pulse is beating vigorously, and his whole body has recovered. It's really incredible, really incredible. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. Another doctor added. An old doctor who had been silent all this time stroked his beard and withdrew his hand from taking the pulse. He looked at the Pan father and son and asked, yesterday, his injuries were so serious, but today, he has almost recovered. May I ask Master Pan, second young master, what miracle medicine did you give to eldest young master? Master Pan was startled and shook his head, how could we have any miracle medicine? Yesterday, even the imperial physicians came. Whether it was you or the imperial physicians, they only looked at him and left without prescribing any medicine. How could you have given him any medicine? Tomorrow, they would all say that he would not survive. No one would even prescribe him any medicine. Even the wounds on his body were simply treated. He had to personally clean them up and apply new medicine. Since the incident yesterday, he had been guarding this room and no one had given him any medicine. That's strange. Eldest young master's injuries were almost healed overnight. This doesn't seem to be self-healing. But if there's any medicine that can cure eldest young master's injuries, this old man has never heard of it in all my years as a doctor. If there is, it can only be the legendary elixir of the gods. He seemed to be muttering to himself. Unexpectedly, when Pan Ning heard this, his heart trembled. His eyes narrowed as if he had thought of something. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he looked up again, he sighed and said, "Yesterday, my father and I were guarding this room. If there was any miracle medicine, we wouldn't have started preparing for my brother's funeral." Hearing this, the other doctors nodded. They also knew about this. Last night, the Pan family had already started preparing for the funeral. But in the second half of the night, Pan Hong's condition gradually improved. If there is, then it's because of His Majesty's good fortune and the chi of the true dragon that my brother escaped death. When he said this, Pan Ning's face was filled with gratitude and awe. He even bowed respectfully in the direction of the imperial palace. Hearing this, the doctors were startled and carefully asked, "Could it be that the emperor came last night?" "That's right. Other than the people from the Pan family, His Majesty also came to visit my brother last night. Not long after His Majesty left, my brother's aura gradually stabilized. I think this must be due to His Majesty's protection," Pan Ning said excitedly. The doctors looked at each other. They were a little surprised and a little uncertain, but in the end, they all felt that maybe it was really like this. Otherwise, how could it make sense? Pan Ning said excitedly, his face full of gratitude. Even Father Pan believed him, saying repeatedly, "When Hong recovers, he must kowtow to His Majesty to thank His Majesty for his kindness." After the doctors prescribed the medicine, the servants sent the doctors away. In less than half a day, another piece of news spread outside. Pan Hong, the eldest son of the Pan family, who was originally said by the doctors and imperial physicians to be unable to live past last night, actually survived. As the news spread, the legend of His Majesty's visit to the Pan family last night and the chi of the true dragon that saved the eldest son of the Pan family from death's door also spread. Chapter 44-59. So you're saying that Pan Hong survived? The emperor looked at the people below and asked. "Your Majesty, it is said that he survived. The doctors in the city have seen him and his pulse has stabilized. However, I heard that the tendons in his legs were severed. Even if he survives, I'm afraid he won't be able to stand up again." Hearing this, the emperor was silent for a moment, then said, "Have the imperial physician go to the Pan family again. No matter what, his injuries must be treated." "Yes, sir." The person below responded, bowed, and then left. After a while, the emperor looked at the old man hidden in the shadows and asked, "What do you think is going on?" "Last night when I went to see Pan Hong, I clearly saw that his breathing was very weak and that he would not survive. Why did I hear that he survived today?" The old man walked out from the shadows and clasped his hands in front of him. He slightly leaned forward and respectfully said, "The doctors in the city and the imperial physician in the palace all made the same diagnosis. Moreover, the injury to his lungs is not something that can be cured by ordinary medicine. Now that Pan Hong has survived, it is clear that after your Majesty left, he must have taken some life-saving medicine." "Medicine?" The emperor was slightly startled. He looked at him and asked hesitantly, "In this world, does medicine really exist?" The emperor did not believe the rumors that were spread outside about him being protected by the true dragon and son of heaven. Last night, he only went to take a look. Even if there was a true dragon and son of heaven protecting him, it could not have reached Pan Hong. The old man's eyes moved slightly as if he remembered something. He slowly said, "In this world, there are immortals, so naturally there are medicine. However, if not for a great opportunity, even if an immortal appeared in front of us, we would not be able to recognize their true form." Oh. Hearing this, the emperor was immediately interested and asked, "Could it be that you have seen it before? Are those immortals as powerful as the legends say? Can they fly in the sky, burrow into the ground, move mountains and overturn seas?" The old man smiled and said, "I don't dare to hide it from your majesty. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I once saw a white-robed immortal flying on a sword. That immortal's grace is still vivid in my mind. There really are immortals in this world?" His Majesty's eyes widened, unable to hide his excitement. "Where did you meet them? Why have I never heard you mention it?" No one knew how excited and expectant the emperor was on this day. It was the first time he had heard about immortals, and the people he trusted had personally confirmed the existence of immortals in this world. His heart couldn't help but jump. Immortals. That was an existence that even the emperor couldn't compare to. Even though he was the emperor and was in charge of a dynasty, his lifespan was only 100 years. In fact, he might not even be able to live to 100 years old. After all, it was already rare for ordinary people to live to 60 or 70 years old, and it was even rarer to live to 100 years old. He was in a high position and held power in his hands. Naturally, he hoped that his lifespan would be endless and he would live as long as the heavens. If he had the help of an immortal or if they gave him a pill that could increase his lifespan, then, thinking of this, his heart suddenly became excited, and a thought faintly formed in his heart. Meanwhile, at the Pan residence. Since Pan Hong's condition had stabilized, the Pan family heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, to them, Pan Hong's survival was more important than anything else. Chapter 4460. He knew that his elder brother could survive this time because of how, those 3 children were not ordinary children. Even if they did not say anything, he could guess. After all, a person who had been sentenced to death by the doctor and the imperial physician, who said that he could not be saved, survived overnight. Moreover, his internal injuries were almost healed. Others did not know what was going on, but he knew. He just did not expect that the 3 children were so capable, and even more did not expect that they would be willing to risk being discovered to save his elder brother. He was grateful, but at this time, he was conflicted. Should he go and thank the 3 children? If he did not go, he would always feel that he owed them a big thank you. If he went, he remembered that how did not tell him. It was obvious that he did not want him to know. If he went, wouldn't he hesitated between going and not going, but he could not tell others. He could not help but sigh softly. Forget it. Since they did not want him to know, he would pretend not to know. He would remember this life-saving grace in his heart for the time being. If there was a chance in the future, he would repay it. After freshening up in the yard and resting for a while, Pan Ning went to the south yard. Standing outside the southern courtyard, he saw the 2 little ones practicing their fists with Hao by their side, guiding them. His eyes flashed. "Young Master Hao, second master is here," 17 reported. Uncle Ning. Seeing him, Yu was beaming with smiles, then trotting to his side, she asked, "Uncle Ning, is Uncle Hong well?" Pan Ning smiled and said, "The doctor said that his life is no longer in danger." He looked at Hao and said, "During this period of time, the old man will not be able to teach you. He was shocked and fell down, but he is much better today. The doctor said that he needs to recuperate well for a few days." "Yes." Hao responded. "Uncle Ning, my elder brother will teach us." "It's okay." Let great-grandfather recuperate well. When he is better, he will teach us. Yu said with a smile. All right, if you have anything else, or if you need anything, feel free to look for me. Pan Ning said, exhorting them a few more times before leaving first. After he left, 17 also retreated to stand guard outside the courtyard. Inside the courtyard, Mu Chen looked at his eldest brother and asked, does he know? At the side, Yu blinked her eyes and looked at them, quietly listening. Hao paused and said, it doesn't matter if he knows or not. Let's just leave it at that. Even if he knew, he didn't have to say it out loud. Continue practicing. Hao looked at the two of them and said, go through the entire set of fist techniques today. I want to check tomorrow. After instructing the two of them and 17, he went back to his room and prepared to cultivate there. The two little fellows agreed and began to practice obediently. Not long after Pan Ning left, Bo Qing, Bowen, and Xue He came to the south courtyard. Bowen and Xue He were especially happy to know that their father wouldn't die. Let's tell this good news to little sister Yu and the rest. They will definitely be very happy. Fu Qin grinned and said, today, my mother told me that great-grandfather's health is much better after knowing that uncle is fine. The three of them talked as they walked to the south courtyard. Just as they were about to enter, they were stopped by 17. Chapter 44-61. Ah. Why? We have good news to tell them, Bo Qing said as he poked his head in, wanting to take a look, but was not allowed to take half a step forward. Hao, and the other two had been staying with the Pan family for a few months, so Bowen also knew the rules of the south courtyard, so he said, in that case, we won't go in. We'll come back later. But since we're already here, are we just going to leave like this? Bo Qing rolled his eyes and suddenly shouted loudly, Sister Yu, we're here to find you, but 17 won't let us in. Come out quickly. The two little guys who were practicing boxing heard the voice and looked at each other. Yu said, brother, it's brother Bo Qing and the others. Mu Chen paused for a moment, thinking that his big brother was cultivating in the room and shouting like that was not a solution, so he said, let's go out and take a look, don't let him disturb big brother. Okay. Yu nodded and followed him out of the courtyard. Because their parents were not by their side, they had to do a lot of things by themselves. Coupled with their big brother's guidance, although the two were young, they were not as naughty and playful as other children. Outside, Mu Chen glanced at Bo Qing and said, don't shout, it's too noisy. Fu Qing chuckled and ignored him. Instead, he smiled happily and said, let me tell you, my uncle won't die. The doctor said he won't die. We know, Mu Chen said. Ah. How did you know? Bo Qing asked in surprise. Yu smiled and said, Uncle Ning came just now, he told us. Yu looked at Bo Qing and said seriously, Brother Bo Qing, next time you can't shout loudly outside this courtyard, you'll disturb my big brother. Bo Qing was a little embarrassed by her words and hurriedly promised, I won't next time, but 17 has been guarding this courtyard and won't let us in. Yu looked at him with a smile and said, because my big brother told 17 not to let anyone in. Big brother doesn't like to be disturbed, he'll get angry. Yes, I know. I won't do it again, he promised again. Bowen looked at the two of them and said, great-grandfather has to recuperate and can't teach us for a while. Do you want to study with us? No need, we'll just study in the south courtyard, Mu Chen said. Alright, then we'll head back first. Bowen said as he led Cher away. Younger sister Yu, I'll come and find you again tomorrow. Xue turned around and waved her hand before leaving with her brother. Then I'll be leaving too, Fu Qing said as she skipped away. After watching them leave, Mu Chen said, Sister, let's go back. As he spoke, he took her hand and walked towards the courtyard. They were different from them. They had to cultivate well and work hard. Only then could they find the way back and find their parents. NN. Agreed, then obediently returned back to continue her training. Chapter 44-62. Their days in the Pan family passed day by day. During these days, Hao and the other two still cultivated on their own. During this time, the three of them went to see Pan Hong a few times and watched as his body recovered day by day. However, he could no longer stand up on his feet. On this day, Pan Ning came back from outside and went directly to the southern courtyard to find Hao and the other two. Today, I learned that the emperor issued an imperial edict to search for the traces of immortals. Now the imperial edict has been sent to various cities and towns. I heard that it was because an old man beside the emperor saw an immortal flying on a sword when he was young, so he had the idea of searching for immortals. As Pan Ning spoke, he looked at the calm faces of the three children. He paused for a moment and said, "There is one more thing. The emperor summoned me today and specifically asked if my brother had been given any immortal medicine." When he saw the three children looking at him, he hurriedly said, "I told him that no immortal medicine was used. However, I feel that he is a little suspicious. He thinks that there must be some inside story for my brother to survive such a serious injury." However, Hao didn't say anything about this. He only asked, "He issued an imperial edict to search for immortals. Can it match the traces of cultivators?" Pan Ning shook his head and said, "This is hard to say. After all, if immortals don't display immortal techniques, they look no different from ordinary people. People like us can't tell whether they are immortals or not." "Yes, are you sure you can't tell?" Hao nodded and agreed. After all, if they weren't immortal cultivators, they naturally couldn't sense the spiritual aura of immortal cultivators. "But don't worry. If there is news, I will inform you immediately." Pan Ning looked at the three of them and said, "Thank you, Uncle Ning." Yu thanked him with a smile. Pan Ning smiled. "You are welcome." He didn't disturb them and left after delivering the news. Once the news of the emperor's search for immortals spread, it could be said that the whole country was shocked. Many people were discussing whether immortals really existed in this world. What did immortals look like? In that remote village, the old village chief's man, who had heard the news, sat at the door and smoked a hookah. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't help but think of the scene from a few months ago. They thought of the three children. His Majesty's search for immortals said that anyone who discovered the whereabouts of immortals would be greatly rewarded. However, even if they heard that there would be a great reward, the two of them did not dare to reveal anything about what happened that day. That was an immortal who had saved them. Even though the three of them were still so young, they didn't dare to casually mention that matter. They were fortunate enough to meet an immortal in this lifetime, so this matter could only rot in their stomachs, never to be spoken of. As the days passed, some people became greedy and said that they had seen traces of immortals in the deep mountains and old forests. However, the emperor sent people to find traces of immortals. After finding out that there were people who were greedy, he immediately ordered them to be killed. For a time, those people who wanted to gamble with greed all stopped thinking about it. In the blink of an eye, a year passed. In another world, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu, who were looking for the three children, went to many places in this year's time, but they still couldn't find the whereabouts of the three children. Chapter 44-63. Hearing her murmur, Xianyuan Mose followed her gaze. When his deep gaze fell on the little girl, there was a trace of absent-mindedness in his expression. It had been more than a year and the two children were almost 4 years old. He gathered his thoughts and hugged Fengjiu beside him, saying, "We've searched many regions and towns in this year and 4 months. Perhaps the children aren't far from us. The two little ones are almost 4 years old and Hao is almost 10 years old. I just don't know how they've changed these days. How much taller have they grown? Has their cultivation improved? Have they thought of us? Fengjiu said softly. There was an indescribable sense of loss in her heart. Let's find an inn to rest first. I'll go around the city and ask around to see if there's any news about them here. Xianyuan Mose said as he held her hand and walked towards the inn in front of them. Arriving at the inn, the two people who had booked a room were about to go upstairs when a surprised voice suddenly sounded. Fengjiu. Hearing the voice, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu both stopped and looked back. With this look, their eyes couldn't help but flicker slightly. Murongishuan. Why are you here? Fengjiu asked as she looked at the man who was sitting at the table in the corner drinking wine. That man was her former fiancé, Murongishuan, whom she hadn't seen for a long time and had even almost forgotten in her memory. Murongishuan was wearing a cyan-colored robe and his hair was loosely draped over his shoulders, covering half of his outstanding appearance. He had a beard on his chin which made him look less like an elegant immortal and more like a casual and unrestrained person. Compared to a few years ago, he had changed a lot. If he hadn't called out to Fengjiu, they probably wouldn't have noticed him in the corner. Murongishuan walked over. After his gaze swept past Xianyuan Mose, it landed on Fengjiu. Looking at that face that still hadn't changed, his eyes flashed and he smiled. I didn't expect to meet you here. Why don't we sit down and have a drink? Fengjiu looked at Xianyuan Mose. Xianyuan Mose nodded and sat down with her at a table in the corner. After Murongishuan saw the two of them sit down, he also sat down and poured a cup of wine for each of them. Only then did he say, I came here because I was traveling around. After all, people like me don't have a fixed residence. It's not bad to wander around and see more of the local customs. He smiled and took a sip of wine. He looked at the two of them and asked, what about you two? Why would you come to such a place? Xianyuan Mose raised his glass and drank without saying a word. Fengjiu paused for a moment and said, we came out to look for the child. Look for the child. Murongishuan, who was drinking, was slightly startled. He looked at her and asked, what do you mean? Our child is missing, so we came out to look for him. Fengjiu said slowly. Before he asked, she said, when we were fighting with the Devil Master used the blood curse ancient array to send them away. We don't know where they are, so we came out to look for them and see if we can find them. Murongishuan paused for a moment and said, I've been wandering outside for too long and haven't been back for a long time. I don't know what happened over there. Why don't you tell me? How is the Devil Master now? Has the ancient Black Lotus been destroyed? There wasn't anything that couldn't be said, so Fengjiu told him everything. Chapter 44-64. Seeing that the matter had been explained and the wine had been drunk, Xianyuan Mose stood up and said, Audiobook, go and rest for a while. All right. Fengjiu stood up and said to Murongishuan, we'll go and rest first. Murongishuan also stood up and responded. After watching them go upstairs, he continued to sit down and drink. He didn't expect to meet Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu here. He also didn't expect that so many things would happen after he left that familiar place to travel. Was the child missing? As he drank, he thought about it. He had been traveling around for the past few years. He couldn't go to some of the other powerful heaven realms with his strength, but he could come and go as he pleased in some of the smaller heaven realms. A thought arose in his mind. He finished the wine in his cup, paid the bill, and got up to leave. In the room on the second floor, Fengjiu took off his coat and rubbed his neck. He walked to the table and sat down, saying, this Murongishuan has changed a lot in the past few years. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have dared to connect him with that person in the past. Xianyuan Mose poured a cup of water for him and said, don't pay too much attention to irrelevant people. You should rest first. I've asked the waiter to prepare hot water. Take a hot bath and then go to sleep. You still want to go out? Fengjiu looked at him and asked. I'm going to walk around the city. I'll also take a trip to the city lord's residence. The world was so big that they couldn't search every place. Even if they were in a town, they couldn't search every house. So, every time they arrived at a place, they would walk around and greet the local city lord or other forces, asking them to pay more attention. It's getting late. Why don't you rest for a while? We'll go out tomorrow. Feng Jiu said. He didn't want him to be too tired. There was no one else by his side. He did a lot of things by himself. However, this way, he would be more tired physically and mentally. It's okay. You rest first. I'll be back soon. It won't be long. Xian Yuanmo said. Then, he heard the sound of the waiter knocking on the door. Guest, here's the water. Come in. Xian Yuanmo said. The waiter came in with the water and placed the bath water in the corner of the washroom. After filling the basin with water, he left. The water is ready. You go take a bath and relax. I'll be back in a while. Xian Yuanmo motioned for her to take a bath first. Alright, don't be gone for too long, Feng Jiu said softly. After sending him out of the room, he locked the door and turned to take a bath in the inner room. Xian Yuanmo walked around the city alone. He didn't sense any familiar aura here. After all, the child had something they gave her. Even if the connection was cut off, as long as they were within a certain distance, he could still sense their presence. After asking for directions to the city lord's residence, he was about to go there when he saw Murong Yixian, whom he had met not long ago, trapped in a corner in an alley. Chapter 44-65. Ghost cultivators who could cultivate a physical body and dared to appear in the day were naturally powerful. However, he didn't know why there were so many ghost cultivators in this place. Moreover, it looked like they were here specifically for Murong Yishuan. He watched from the shadows for a while. The boundary formed by Yin Qi blocked the aura of the battle inside. Even though the alley was only about 10 meters away from the main street, the people outside the main street didn't know what was happening in the alley. Seeing that Murong Yishuan was dealing with more than 10 ghost cultivators alone, he didn't help him but watched as a bystander. After all, Murong Yishuan wasn't weak. Although more than 10 ghost cultivators were powerful, they wouldn't be able to take his life. After about the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the boundary formed by Yin Qi broke apart with the death of more than 10 ghost cultivators. Murong Yishuan, whose robes were cut with several wounds, walked out. As if he sensed something, he looked in a certain direction. However, he didn't see anything. He paused for a moment, then turned around and left. After he left, Xian Yuanmo walked out from the shadows. After watching him leave, he also headed in the direction of the city lord's residence. In the evening, when Xian Yuanmo returned to the inn, Feng Jiu had already fallen asleep. However, he opened his eyes when he heard the sound of his return. You're back? Feng Jiu asked. His voice carried a hint of sleepiness. I'm back. Xian Yuanmo responded and said, I went out for a walk today and found that this small place isn't very peaceful. Oh. What happened? Feng Jiu asked as he sat up from the bed. I saw more than 10 ghost cultivators who dared to appear in the day. They weren't weak. However, they were all killed by Murong Yishuan in the end. He poured a cup of water and drank as he spoke slowly. Hearing this, Feng Jiu was slightly surprised. How did he provoke those ghost cultivators? A ghost cultivator who has materialized a physical body and dares to appear in the daytime is not simple. It seems that his cultivation has also improved in the past few years of training outside. When I went to the City Lord Manor, I heard the City Lord mention that there's a ghost king in the Yin Mountain area. He has many ghost cultivators under him, and he often comes out to do evil. When I came back just now, the aura in the city had changed slightly, and many shops had closed their doors. Xian Yuanmo said as he played with the teacup in his hand. His eyes flashed as he thought of the scene he saw when he came back. Hearing this, Fengjiu's eyes flashed slightly. He lifted the blanket and got out of bed, putting on his clothes, and said, "This small place is also like this? Then I really have to go and take a look." She smiled and said, "I've also slept for a while. Now that I've heard you say that, I'm not sleepy anymore. How about this? I'll go out and take a look. You rest first. You want to deal with the Ghost King?" Xianyuan Mose raised his eyebrows and looked at her. "Since we've encountered it, how can we leave it alone?" Fengjiu said slowly, taking light steps to his side, and said, "We have the strength, so we can naturally take care of it. If we don't, wouldn't we be allowing the Ghost King to harm the people?" Actually, she was thinking that whether it was the ghost cultivators or the Ghost King, leaving them alive would be a great disaster. If she didn't eliminate this threat, if one day, her children came to this place, with their innate spiritual bodies, wouldn't they be targeted by the Ghost King and the ghost cultivators? Chapter 44-66. I'll go with you. As Xianyuan Mose spoke, he smirked and said, "I knew it. If you knew, you would definitely go." Even if she didn't say it, he could vaguely guess what she was thinking. Seeing this, Fengjiu smiled and didn't say anything more. He just replied softly, "Okay." When night fell, the two were ready to leave the inn. The waiter of the inn saw that they were going out and reminded them, "Sir, all the houses in the city close early to rest at night. If you go out now, there won't be many people on the street." "It's okay." Fengjiu smiled. "But it's not safe at night." Before the waiter could finish his words, the two had already left the inn and walked towards the street. Seeing this, he shook his head and sighed. Accidents often happened at night in the city. Some were children, some were women, and some were cultivators. Over time, the people in the city knew that it was best not to walk around at night. Only some foreigners didn't know and didn't listen to advice. Those two were so outstanding. He was afraid that they wouldn't be able to come back this time. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu walked on the street. On both sides of the street, the lanterns in front of the shops swayed in the night wind. They also saw that in the dark of the street, there were ghosts floating around. They wanted to get close to them, but after several failed attempts, they quietly retreated and followed them from afar. There are also cultivators in this place. How can they let these ghosts make trouble here? Fengjiu frowned slightly and glanced around. Then, he raised his hand and the two cloud-swallowing beasts, White Tiger and White, jumped out. "Master!" The contract beasts surrounded him and called. "Go, clear the ghosts in the city." Fengjiu said lightly and glanced at the ghosts who were flying around and escaping quickly. If Chen and Yu were here, with their innate spiritual bodies, wouldn't they be targeted by these ghosts? Thinking of the ghost that targeted you last time, a cold light flashed in his eyes. "Yes." The contracted beasts replied and leaped into the air, chasing in different directions. "The two children have the magical treasures we gave them. Ordinary ghosts and ghosts can't get close to them." Xianyuan Mose held her hand and said, "Don't worry too much. They'll be fine. If I don't see them return safely with my own eyes, how can I be at ease?" Fengjiu said softly as he looked ahead. He only hoped that they would be able to turn the misfortune into a blessing, and that they would have the help of a benefactor. That night, all the Yin souls in the city were wiped out by Fengjiu's contracted beasts. That night, the Ghost King, who had occupied the mountain, was annihilated by Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu. Almost none of the ghost cultivators under them who were in Yin Mountain survived. After wiping out the Ghost King and the ghost cultivators in Yin Mountain, Fengjiu burned Yin Mountain for 3 full days with heaven fire. After completely removing the Yin Qi in the mountain, they quietly left the area. As for the people in the city, they only knew that an inexplicable fire had burned Yin Mountain for a total of 3 days. They had no idea what had happened there. Only the city lord of the city had rushed over to take a look when he heard the news, and then he bowed respectfully to the heavens 3 times. Chapter 44-67. 17, who was standing guard outside the courtyard, looked at the small figure sitting cross-legged on the roof. He paced back and forth nervously, looking at the roof from time to time. Faintly, he seemed to feel that there was something different in the air. This was the same aura as when he saw young Master Hao killing people with his sword in the dilapidated courtyard. Due to the location of the south courtyard and Pan Ning's instructions, the secret guards in the residence did not come over to check even though they noticed the commotion. After all, they knew that 17 was guarding the south courtyard. In the room of the southern courtyard, Mu Chen and Mu Yu were sleeping soundly. However, when they sensed the fluctuation of the spiritual aura, the two quickly got out of bed and opened the door to go outside. Looking up, they saw their big brother sitting cross-legged on the roof, bathed in the moonlight. "Young Master Chen, miss you, why didn't you put on your outer clothes?" 17 saw them and quickly went into the room to help them put on their outer clothes. "It's okay, it's not cold." Yu smiled and looked up at the roof. "Brother, is elder brother about to break through?" "I'm not sure." Mu Chen shook his head and looked up nervously. On the roof, Hao only felt a crack coming from a certain part of his body, as if something had split open. In an instant, the sealed spiritual aura gushed out and went to his dantian. Sweat seeped out of his forehead. In his mind, scenes appeared as his body broke through. The past that he could not remember, the blurry things, finally became clear at this moment. Just as his spiritual aura surged, a ray of light flashed from his body and leaped into the air. A woo! A wolf howl soared into the sky. The sound echoed in the night and spread throughout the imperial city. Hiss. "Wolf, wolf!" 17 was shocked and her eyes widened. She did not expect that a huge snow-white silver wolf would jump out of young Master Hao's body. How did he do it? How could there be a wolf living in his body? The moment the wolf howled, Hao suddenly opened his eyes. Light flashed in his eyes and he regained his usual vigor and vigor. At this moment, his spiritual energy and aura had returned to normal. The aura that radiated from this little boy who was not even 10 years old was very intimidating. Mu Chen and Mu Yu looked at their eldest brother in surprise, as well as the majestic silver wolf that jumped into the air and landed steadily on the roof. Their eyes were full of surprise. Hao raised his hand and stroked the silver wolf beside him. A faint smile appeared on his cold little face. "You're finally out, Master." Silver Wolf called out and lowered its head slightly to look at Mu Chen and Mu Yu below. When it saw the two of them, Wolf Yin's gaze softened a little. They were the two children of the master it had once wanted to follow. Ever since the battle with the Devil Master, it had fallen into a deep slumber. Now that it had woken up and saw them together, it was relieved. Hao gently jumped down from the roof. The silver wolf followed suit and landed steadily beside him. Chapter 44-68. Young Master Hao, don't worry. I understand. He quickly bowed and said. You may leave. Hao said, reaching out to lead Mu Chen and Mu Yu back to the room, followed by the silver wolf. After watching them enter the room, 17 couldn't help but wipe away the cold sweat on his forehead. He took a deep breath and turned to leave. After a while, 2 shadow guards came in. 17, is there anything strange here? The 2 shadow guards asked, looking around. 17's eyes flashed and asked, what's strange? Didn't you hear the wolf howl? The wolf howl was very loud just now, almost the entire capital heard it. Also, we seem to have seen a snow-white wolf leaping into the air and disappearing in the blink of an eye. No, I didn't see it, but I did hear a wolf howl. Maybe it came from outside. 17 quickly said. Then you guard the southern courtyard well. We'll go check out other places. It's not normal for a wolf howl to appear in the middle of the night. The two shadow guards said and quickly left. In the Pan household, Old Master Pan and Old Master Pan got up in the middle of the night. They put on their coats and went out the door, looking at the night sky with confusion and surprise. Because they also heard the wolf howl. How could there be a wolf howl in the capital, under the imperial city? This was too strange. When Pan Hong heard the wolf howl, he called for someone to inquire about it. After learning about the situation, he leaned against the head of the bed, looking thoughtful. Pan Ning's heart jumped when he heard the wolf howl. He put on his coat and went out the door, calling for the shadow guards to inquire about it. He stood in the courtyard and looked at the night sky, his eyes moving slightly. In the capital, under the imperial city, the wolf howl spread to almost every corner. Inexplicably, his heart skipped a beat and he vaguely thought of something. He raised his foot and wanted to take a step, but in the end, he didn't put it down. That night, it wasn't just the Pan family who heard the wolf howls. The emperor in the imperial palace, as well as the various aristocratic families in the imperial capital, were all astonished. No one could understand why there would be a wolf howl right under the feet of the emperor, which was usually heard deep in the mountains and forests. Compared to everyone's surprise and contemplation. That night, Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu chatted in the room for the whole night. The lights in the room were also on all night. It was not until dawn that Hao returned to the room, and Mu Chen and Mu Yu went to sleep. They slept until noon before waking up. Fu Qing, who had been waiting outside the courtyard for the whole morning, with both hands under his chin. From time to time, he looked at the quiet courtyard, and then at 17, who was guarding outside the courtyard, and asked, 17, did they sleep last night? Why are they sleeping so late? Usually, they would be awake at this time. This. I don't know. 17 said and shook her head. SSSSSS, teat. Why are you guys here? Fu Qing turned around and looked at them in surprise. You guys didn't go to class today? Great-grandfather told us to practice writing and memorize books by ourselves. After we finished practicing, my father said that he would bring us to the city to play. Therefore, my brother and I came over to call little sister Yu, and the others. Teet 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 teet, s. Chapter 44-69. They haven't woken up yet? Bowen looked at 17 in surprise. Usually, they should be up by this time. Are they sick? Did you go in to take a look? 17 hurriedly said, no, they slept late last night. Fu Qing heard this and pouted unhappily. He stood up and put his hands on his waist. 17, when I asked you just now, why did you say you didn't know? This point 17 sighed softly and said, young Master Hao told me not to disturb them before they wake up, so. He had been by their side for more than a year and understood their living habits. Fu Qing was more mischievous, so he didn't plan to tell him much. Fu Qing snorted. You're bullying me because I'm young. I'm going to tell my father. Fu Qing, they haven't woken up yet. It looks like we can't go. Do you want to come with us to play? Bowen asked and looked at Fu Qing beside him. Yes, I'll go with you. When he heard that they were going to play, he immediately smiled. I'll go memorize when I get back. Otherwise, if I can't memorize it tomorrow, great-grandfather will hit me. Half a year ago, Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu stopped reading and writing with them because they could always memorize their books after just one look. They learned things quickly and their great-grandfather praised them for being smart. They didn't need to learn how to read and write anymore. He didn't go to school to study. Hao, and the other two didn't go out to play either. They stayed in the courtyard all day and didn't know what they were doing. They also rarely went out. If he didn't come to play with them, they wouldn't have gone to play with them. Brother Bowen, Brother Fu Qing, Sister Xue, why are you here? Xue was wearing a pink dress as she skipped out of the room, followed by Mu Qin, who was wearing a white robe. You're awake. Fu Qing saw them and happily ran forward. Mu Qin, my father wants to take us out to play. Do you want to go together? Bowen asked as he looked at the two little guys. Yu looked at her brother and asked, Brother, are we going? Her little face was full of anticipation. Ask big brother, Mu Qin said. Just after he spoke, Yu ran to the door of her big brother's room and shouted, Big brother, Bowen asked us to go out and play together, should we go? The tender voice was filled with anticipation. Hao, who was in the room, heard this and his lips curled up slightly. He put on his belt and walked out. Go. Hao opened the door and looked at his sister in front of him. He patted her little head and said, I haven't been out for a long time. It's good to go out for a walk. Alright, I'll go talk to my father first. You guys can come later. Bowen smiled and turned to leave. 17. Go to the kitchen and get some pastries. Hao instructed as he looked at 17. Yes. 17 responded and quickly turned to leave. Let's go to the front. My father is in the front yard. Xue held Yu's hand and walked forward with a smile. Behind them, Mu Qin and Fu Qing followed, and Hao walked at the back. In the front yard, Pan Hong sat in a wheelchair and was talking to Pan Ning while Bowen stood quietly to the side. Father, second uncle. Xue greeted them with a smile when she saw them. Chapter 44-70. Pan Hong and Pan Ning looked at the children. Although their children were not bad looking, they were easily outshone when compared to Hao, and the other two. In fact, they had long known about this. It was just that today, the difference seemed even more obvious. Hao was obviously different from usual. There seemed to be an indescribable feeling in his body and his gaze. I don't have anything to do today, so I'll go out with you. We can take 2 carriages. Pan Ning smiled and looked at the children. Is there anywhere you want to go today? Father, I want to pick peaches. They said there is a large peach tree behind the Emperor Temple, and there are peaches to pick now. Bo Qin quickly said. Oh. Who said that? Pan Ning raised an eyebrow at his son. The servants in the residence said so. The Emperor Temple is a little far from here. It's getting late if we go now. He looked at the sky and said, moreover, if we go now, we may not be able to make it back tonight. We can stay in the Emperor Temple. Since the children like it, we can stay there for the night and come back tomorrow. Pan Hong smiled and looked at his brother. Moreover, the Emperor Temple is quiet and quiet. I haven't been there for a long time, so it's a good time to take a look. Pan Ning thought for a moment and said, since Big Brother has said so, then let's go. I'll let Father and the others know. You all get in the carriage first. That's great. Bo Qin jumped up in excitement. Bowen also had a happy smile on his face. Xue smiled as she leaned into her father's embrace. Picking peaches. Yu blinked and looked at Hao. Big brother, I seem to remember picking peaches before. Hao heard and nodded. Yes, you did. Their mother had a large peach forest. Mu Qin also thought about it. It seemed that such a scene had appeared in his memory, but he could not remember it clearly. Pan Hong looked at the 3 of them and smiled. Let's go. We'll get in the carriage first. He raised his hand and a guard came out from behind to help him push the wheelchair. There were some things that he might not understand, but he could vaguely guess. However, since he didn't say anything, then he would just pretend that he didn't know. The 2 carriages were accompanied by 12 guards. There were also 8 secret guards protecting them in the dark. The carriages passed through the city and headed towards the Emperor Temple. In the carriage behind them, Fu Qing, Bowen, Shui, and Pan Hong were in the same carriage. At this moment, Fu Qing was pouting with an unhappy expression. "Uncle, why didn't my father let me ride in the same carriage as him?" He looked at Pan Hong, who was drinking tea, and asked. Pan Hong took a sip of tea and asked, "Don't you like sitting in the same carriage as eldest uncle? Or do you dislike Bowen and Shui?" Hearing this, the two people beside him looked at him. Seeing this, Bo Qing hurriedly waved his hand. No, I don't dislike uncle, nor do I dislike brother Bowen and Shui. Since that's the case, you can sit with us. After all, if you go over, it'll be too crowded over there. It won't be comfortable sitting there, Pan Hong said unhurriedly. Is that so? Fu Qing scratched his head. In the end, he could only give up. Chapter 44-71. Hearing this, Mu Chen and Mu Yu, who were eating, paused and looked at Pan Ning. How paused for a moment before asking, "Is the news reliable? How can you be sure that the other party is a cultivator?" He had recovered his memory. Even though he was still young, he had become more cautious in handling matters. This place belonged to the mortal world. In this mortal world, whether it was power or money, neither were things that cultivators sought. Even if a cultivator really came to this place, he should not have shown himself in front of others. Therefore, when he heard that he had traces of an immortal and even invited him back to the imperial capital, he only had doubts in his heart. "I haven't seen him yet. I guess we will only know in a few days," Pan Ning said and looked at Hao, asking, "Do you suspect that person is not an immortal?" Hao shook his head and said, "This place belongs to the mortal world. Generally, cultivators will not come here, unless they are traveling. But if that is the case, they will not appear in front of others and let everyone know." "I understand. I will pay more attention to this matter. I will tell you after I find out more." Pan Ning nodded and said. The carriage moved slowly. Along the way, there was constant laughter in the carriage. The children sitting in the carriage lifted the curtain from time to time and looked at the scenery along the road. They continued until they arrived at the gate of the Emperor Temple. "Come down quickly. We are here." Pan Ning got off the carriage first. After carrying Yu down, he saw Mu Chen lightly jump off the carriage, followed by Hao "Daddy!" Fu Qing jumped down from behind like a little monkey and came to his side in a few steps. "Daddy, are we staying here tonight?" He grabbed his father's hand with one hand and looked at the majestic Buddhist place with curiosity in his eyes. "When we go in later, we will first pay a visit to the abbot of the temple and then take you around," Pan Ning said with a smile and patted his head. "We will stay here tonight. We will go back tomorrow afternoon." On the other side, after the guards helped Pan Hong off the carriage, they pushed the wheelchair towards the gate. Pan Hong shouted at them, "Let's go. Qing, Yu, Mu Chen, don't run around, follow me closely." Pan Ning told them not to run around, and then led them inside. Bowen and Shui followed beside their father's wheelchair. Not long after they entered the door, they saw the abbot, who was over 60 years old, walking slowly towards them with a few young monks. "Amitba, good indeed." The abbot bowed to Pan Hong and Pan Ning and softly chanted the name of Buddha. His gaze swept past the children and landed on Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu behind them. With just a glance, a bright light flashed through his wise eyes. He smiled and put his palms together, bowing again, "I didn't know it was an honored guest. Forgive me for not going out to meet you." Hearing this, Pan Hong's eyes flashed slightly. He turned slightly and his gaze fell on Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu. Pan Ning was also a little surprised. It was said that the abbot of the Emperor Temple had a discerning eye. He didn't expect that he could see that Hao, and the other two were not ordinary at a glance. He smiled and bowed, putting his palms together and saying that they were honored guests. His gaze swept past them and landed on Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu. It was so obvious that they naturally could see it. Chapter 44-72. He had been intelligent since he was a child and was personally taught by his great-grandfather. His temperament was naturally different. However, he was still young and there were many things he could not understand. Hao stood there quietly, neither arrogant nor humble. He looked at the abbot calmly and did not speak. As for Mu Chen, he pursed his lips and glanced at the old monk. His gaze fell on his bald head, and no one knew what he was thinking. Yu, on the other hand, was all smiles. Her pair of beautiful eyes curved into crescents, and her face had a pure and innocent smile. Great Master Huizhen, it has been many years since we last met. You are still as energetic as ever. Pan Hong broke the silence with a smile. He, young master, this old servant is looking forward to playing a few more games with you. He revealed a kind smile, and his gaze turned from the three children to Pan Hong. Of course I am looking forward to playing chess with you. He smiled and said, Great Master, this is my second brother, Pan Ning. Today, he brought a few children to disturb you. Greetings, Great Master Abbot. Pan Ning quickly bowed. The abbot looked at Pan Ning and smiled. Second Master, you are indeed a man of great fortune. Since the Emperor Temple has welcomed you today, I dare not neglect you. As he spoke, he ordered the little monk beside him, clean up the east wing for our guests. Yes, the little monk replied and gestured for them to enter. Then I will bring the children over first. Pan Ning said. After bowing to the abbot, he left with the children. After they left, the abbot said to Pan Hong, Eldest master, this way please. Then, he walked slowly. The guards pushed Pan Hong beside him. The two were like old friends who had known each other for many years. They chatted as they walked until they arrived at a quiet courtyard. The little monk left and so did the guards. Only the abbot and Pan Hong were left in the large courtyard. On the stone table, there was a chessboard and a pot of tea. It was elegant and quiet. Pan Hong sighed. Today, when we meet again, Great Master is still the same. But I am sitting in this wheelchair and will never be able to stand up again. In less than 2 years, I have experienced the ups and downs of this world. The host poured 2 cups of tea and said with a smile, Everything is predestined. Young master, there is no need to sigh. He placed the chess piece in front of him and said, Come, let's see if eldest young master's chess skills have improved after not seeing him for a few years. Hearing this, Pan Hong smiled, picked up a chess piece, and slowly placed it down. On the other side, Pan Ning took the children and followed the little monk to the eastern courtyard. After resting for a while, he took the children to the peach forest behind the mountain. At the same time, in the hall of great strength, a beautiful woman in luxurious clothes was kneeling and praying. She was praying in her heart. After a while, she slowly stood up. The maidservant at the side hurriedly came forward to help her. She personally went forward to add incense. When the monk at the side saw this, he said, If you are feeling depressed, why don't you take a walk in the peach forest at the back of the mountain? Peach forest? The beautiful woman was stunned. After thinking for a while, she said, Okay. She gently bowed and turned to leave the hall. She went to the peach forest at the back of the mountain. At this time, in the peach forest, there were pink and tender peaches on the peach trees. They looked very pleasing. After Pan Ning took the children into the peach forest, the children laughed and played on their own like caged birds. Chapter 44-73. This was a Buddhist land, so naturally, there would not be any danger. There were not many people in the peach forest, so it was very quiet, so they let the children play on their own. Sister Yu, Shui, Brother Bowen, let's play hide and seek. Bo Qing suggested excitedly. Okay. But I'm not playing, I want to hide. Yu smiled and pulled Mu Chen beside her. Brother, come play too. After saying that, she looked around and saw that her brother was not far away. She shouted, Big brother, do you want to play? Not playing, you guys play. Just don't run too far. How did not forget to remind them. Okay. Yu nodded obediently and pulled her brother along as she ran, shouting, Brother Bowen, quickly take Sister Shui to hide. Then hurry up, I'm going to open my eyes when I count to 10. Bo Qing covered his eyes with both hands and leaned against the peach tree as he counted loudly. 1, 2, 3. That Yu pulled Mu Chen along and said in a soft voice, Brother, don't pull a long face. Don't play with Brother Bo Qing, Sister Shui and Brother Bowen, they'll be sad. Mu Chen pursed his lips and said, They only know how to play, too childish. Hearing these words, Yu smiled and said, Big brother, we are all younger than them. But we're stronger than them. He raised his chin, looking proud and arrogant. That's because they're different from us. Yu said with a smile and looked at the bigger peach tree. Brother, let's hide up there. There are more leaves, Brother Bo Qing definitely won't be able to find us. After saying that, she pulled her brother and lightly jumped onto the top of the peach tree. The two of them found a branch to sit on, and with the peach leaves as cover, Yu picked 2 big peaches and wiped them on her body before handing one to Mu Chen. Mu Chen watched as she rubbed the peaches on her body. When her pink dress was stained with peaches, he frowned and lectured her like an older brother. Little sister, you're a girl. You can't always get dirty. As he spoke, he took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and helped her wipe off the peach hairs on her dress. It's okay. I'll go back and take a shower later. Yu said indifferently. She took a bite of the peach and carefully looked around to see if Bo Qing had come looking for her. Unexpectedly, he didn't see Bo Qing. Instead, he saw a beautiful woman wiping her tears under a peach tree not far away. Yu blinked her eyes, then pulling her brother's sleeve, she said, Big brother, there is an ant crying over there. Mu Chen glanced at her and said, Let her cry. It's none of our business. He held the peach but did not eat it. He just played with it in his hand. Yu ate the peach while watching, but didn't say anything. She only listened to the soft comforting words of the 2 maids. After the woman wiped away her tears, the 3 people who were originally standing there also walked over with light steps and stopped at the foot of the peach tree where they were. Madam, this peach tree is very lush and has many peaches. Why don't we pick some and bring them back for good luck? A maidservant said softly with a bamboo basket in her hand. Chapter 44-74. They had been married for many years, but had not had a child all along. Even though the love between husband and wife was deep, it could not withstand the weight of time. Today, she had come here to make a wish, so she naturally hoped to have a good omen. She gathered her thoughts, and her gaze swept past those pink and tender peaches, and finally landed on a comparatively bigger peach. She reached out her hand, and tiptoed, wanting to pluck it, but her fingertips faintly touched it, and she was unable to pluck it. After trying a few times, just when she was about to withdraw her hand, suddenly, a pink and tender little hand stretched out from those lush leaves, and plucked that peach, and handed it over. For you. Yu half lied down, and with a smile on her face, she looked at that beautiful woman who was blankly looking at her. Seeing that she did not speak, and also did not take it, as if she was startled, she again reached out her little hand, and handed it over a few more times, and shouted, For you, peach. Ah! That madam came back to her senses, and let out a low cry. She couldn't help but take a step back, but as if she had thought of something, she raised her head and looked, and just happened to see that smiling and delicate little face between the peach leaves. That pink and tender little face was exquisite and pure, and a pair of beautiful big eyes were looking at her with a smile. That pair of white and chubby little hands were holding a big peach and handing it over. At first glance, it was as if she had seen a peach fairy, causing her heart to involuntarily skip a beat. Peach fairy has appeared. That madam muttered, and unexpectedly directly knelt down, and her eyes were filled with pleasant surprise. Greetings, Peach Fairy. The two maids were also startled by this scene. They only saw that on top of that peach tree, there was a pink and delicate little girl who was looking at them with a smile on her face, and her hand was also holding a big peach. Immediately, seeing their madam kneeling down, they also promptly knelt down, and did not dare to raise their head. There was no other reason, only because this peach tree was big and tall, and its leaves were lush, and peaches were piled up. It was basically not a tree that a child could climb up. And also, that pink and tender little face with a smile on her face was so delicate that it did not seem to belong to this world, and moreover, it was also inside this Buddhist peach forest, so it was as if Peach Fairy had descended. However, compared to them, couldn't help blinking her eyes at this moment. She was somewhat surprised and also somewhat at a loss. She saw that this beautiful auntie couldn't pick the peaches, so she helped her pick them and handed them to her. Why did she kneel down and worship her? Mu Chen, who was sitting on the other side of the branch, glanced down and was a little speechless. Obviously, he did not expect these people to misunderstand. Although they were also immortals, they were not peach immortals. I'm not a peach immortal. Yu said with a beaming smile. Looking at them, she softly said with a smile, "Don't worship me, I won't grow up." When the madam heard this, she was startled for a moment. She carefully raised her head and saw that the little girl had already sat down, her feet dangling in the air. She was still holding the big peach in her hand, and beside her, the leaves were pushed aside. She also saw a boy in a white dress, and that boy also had an exquisite little face that was exactly the same as the little girl's. "We are playing hide and seek," Yu said with a smile. Then she could faintly hear Bo Qing's voice shouting in the peach forest. Chapter 44-75. Before she could finish her words, she saw the little girl stretched out her little hand and handed over the peach, "For you." She looked at her in a daze, only to see a pure smile on the little girl's delicate face. Her pair of beautiful eyes were very lively. Wearing a pink little dress, she looked very cute in a small ball, which made her heart soften involuntarily. At the same time, she stretched out her hand to take the peach and said, "Come down. I'll carry you down." "No, I'm playing hide and seek with brother." Yu shook her head and retracted her hand. She was about to stand up and hide again when her foot slipped and her little body suddenly fell down. "Little sister!" Mu Chen exclaimed and hurriedly stretched out his hand to catch her, but he didn't catch her. The madam, who was standing under the tree, saw the little girl fall and exclaimed in a low voice. She hurriedly reached out to catch her. However, the impact of falling from the tree was too great. Even though the madam caught her, she couldn't stand still. Her whole body fell down, but her hands tightly held the little girl in her arms. "Hiss! Madam!" The two maids exclaimed and hurriedly came forward. Yu blinked her eyes and looked at the madam who fell on the ground. She quickly got down from her and somewhat worriedly asked, "Aunt, how are you? Are you injured?" Mu Chen jumped down from the tree and stood beside Yu, looking at the madam. That madam smiled and said, "I'm fine." She rubbed her waist and felt some pain in her arm. Looking at her arm, she saw that the stone had cut her skin and a trace of blood was oozing out. "I'm bleeding." Yu somewhat blamed herself. "It's okay," the madam said with a smile. Looking at the two children in front of her, she only felt that they were very cute. She thought, if she also had two children like them, how good would that be? "Thank you." Mu Chen thanked her, knowing that if she didn't catch Yu, even if she didn't fall down, it would still be painful. Whose children are you? The madam asked the two children while sitting on the ground and letting the two maids tear a strip of cloth to help her bandage her wound. Yu tilted her head and thought for a while, then said, "My father and mother's children ah. However, we couldn't find our parents, so we stayed at Uncle Ning's house." Hearing this, the madam was slightly startled. "Why can't we find father and mother?" Mu Qin tugged at Yu, motioning her not to say too much. "We have to go now." Saying that, he held Yu's hand and walked towards the road they came from. However, when they had walked more than 10 meters away, they suddenly heard a cry of surprise behind them, as well as the sound of sword chi. Mu Chen and Mu Yu immediately stopped and looked back. They saw several men in black coming out of nowhere and attacking the madam with swords. The two maidservants screamed for help, but one of them was killed by the men in black. The other one was protecting the madam and fleeing while shouting for help. Mu Chen exclaimed in shock because his sister, who was holding his hand, had broken free from his grasp and ran away. Almost without any hesitation, Yu rushed towards that madam. Her small figure moved lightly and her speed was extremely fast. At the same time, she also shouted, "Brother, quickly call for people." Ah! Chapter 44-76. Madam. That maidservant cried out in alarm. She was so scared that her body trembled, but she couldn't do anything. She could only stare at that sword with a pale face. The madam was also shocked. She was so shocked that she couldn't even scream. Just when she thought she was going to die, she saw a small figure standing in front of her. The small figure held a dagger and blocked the long sword that was coming at her. Clang! Only a crisp clang sound was heard. That sword was unexpectedly unable to advance any further. Then, seeing this, the other black-robed men sternly shouted, "Kill them." After the angry shout, several swords attacked Yu and that madam. At this time, a young and tender voice containing anger was heard. "Courting death." Seeing those black-robed men holding swords against his sister, Mu Chen immediately shouted angrily. Pulling out a dagger, he directly attacked the black-robed man at the front. The dagger carried a trace of spiritual aura. With a whoosh, it streaked across the air, and like a sharp arrow, it pierced the neck of a black-robed man. That black-robed man who had raised his sword and was about to slash down groaned. His body stiffened in an instant, and the sword in his hand didn't fall for a long time. His eyes were wide open in horror, and he stared straight ahead as if he didn't dare to believe that the dagger that killed him actually flew out from the hands of a 3- or 4-year-old child and accurately hit his vital point. Seeing this, those black-robed men were startled and looked in that direction. But when they saw that it was only a 3- or 4-year-old boy, they couldn't help but get angry and shouted, "Kill them! End this quickly!" Hao came over after hearing the voice. His figure flitted through the peach trees. Before he reached Yu and Mu Chen's side, he saw those black-robed men making killing moves. After glancing at those black-robed men, his heart slightly moved. 2 streams of qi shot out from his hand, knocking that madam and maidservant unconscious. "Big brother." Yu turned her head and saw her big brother coming over. "Chen, Yu, these people are for you to practice." As Hao spoke, his indifferent gaze swept past the men in black. He did not make a move and chose to let Mu Chen and Mu Yu deal with them. After cultivating for so long, they had yet to experience actual combat. It was just a few black-robed men, so they could use them to practice their skills and courage. The two of them were startled for a moment, but they immediately understood what he meant, so they responded. Yu held the dagger and circulated the spiritual power within her body, and the next moment, she stepped forward. Mu Chen also rushed forward and removed the dagger from the black-clothed man's chest. Spirit force surged in his palm, and killing intent overflowed from his eyes. The two of them had been cultivating for a long time and were very proficient in both their movement techniques and martial skills. However, they had very few opportunities to fight. This time, after hearing their big brother's words, the aura of the two small figures changed the moment their spiritual energy aura surged. Unlike their usual appearances, at this moment, both their bodies and their eyes were filled with killing intent. Their attacks were swift and fierce, without the slightest bit of hesitation. In their hearts, they always remembered that there was no need to show mercy to those who wanted to take their lives. Chapter 44-77. When he was young, his parents taught him personally, telling him that they could not always be by his side to protect him. Only when he became stronger and had the ability to protect himself could they be at ease. And now, he and his younger brother and sister were stranded here. He had also been personally teaching them to cultivate so that they could have the ability to protect themselves, just like how his parents taught him in the past. After a few breaths of time, the forest returned to calm again. On the ground, several corpses were lying there, and the two little people, standing in the middle of the corpses, were seriously wiping the blood-stained daggers in their hands. Pan Ning had rushed over after hearing the commotion. However, he did not expect to see such a scene when he arrived. Hiss! What happened? Are you all right? Pan Ning's face changed and quickly stepped forward. He saw Hao standing on the side, and the two little ones standing beside the woman who had fallen on the ground. Uncle Ning, we are fine. Yu said, looking at the corpses on the ground and slightly lowering her head. Mu Chen looked at the corpses with a taut face, his eyes were calm, as if those people were not killed by him. Pan Ning stepped forward to check. His brows furrowed slightly, and his face was solemn. He said, "Did the Death Warriors sneak into a peaceful place of Buddhism?" Looking at the dead Death Warriors, he looked at the children with a complicated expression. Apart from them, there was no one else here. Therefore, he knew very well who killed these men of sacrifice. They wanted to kill this ant, and then wanted to kill us, so we killed them. Yu whispered, somewhat uneasily grabbing the corner of her clothes. Pan Ning sighed softly and said, "Don't be afraid, it's all right." He patted Yu's little head, but when he spoke, he felt strange. These children even dared to kill Death Warriors, why would they be afraid? I tell you, if someone asks later, you can say that these people were killed by me. As for the rest, don't say a word. Pan Ning instructed, knowing that this matter was not so simple. The three responded and looked at him. How, take them to Bowen and the others first, and then take them back to the courtyard to rest. Pan Ning said, glancing at 17 from the corner of his eye. All right, Hao replied before leading his younger siblings away. Young Master Hao, young Master Chen, miss you, When 17 saw them, she quickly bowed. Seeing that they had left, she quickly went to Pan Ning's side. Second young master, what happened? He looked at the woman and the corpses on the ground in astonishment. We'll talk about it later. Now, you go to the front and find the Master Abbot and ask him to come over. Pan Ning instructed. Yes. 17 replied and quickly left. Pan Ning stepped forward and saw that the woman and her maidservant had only fainted. He first pinched the woman's Renjong acupoint, and the woman slowly regained consciousness. Greetings, Madam Ho. Pan Ning bowed and took 3 steps back. The madam rubbed her forehead and opened her eyes. When she saw the corpse in front of her, she thought of what had happened and her face paled. She then seemed to have thought of something and looked around, but the 2 children were gone. Where are the 2 children? She asked anxiously. They're fine. Madam, you don't have to worry. Pan Ning said. Chapter 44-78. Yes. Pan Ning replied. He looked at her and said, Madam, what happened here just now? On the other side, the abbot and Pan Hong were playing chess when they saw a young monk rushing in with 17. Abbot, it's not good. This benefactor said that there was an assassin in the back of the mountain and someone died. The young monk hurriedly said. Eldest young master, Master Abbot. 17 looked at the two and hurriedly bowed. Pan Hong frowned and looked at 17. He asked, what happened? Why would an assassin sneak into a Buddhist place? Eldest young master, Master Abbot, it was the second young master who asked me to invite you two over. I don't know anything else. The abbot stood up and said, someone died in a Buddhist place. It's not a small matter. I'll go and take a look. Eldest young master, don't worry. You can follow me later. As soon as he finished speaking, he quickly left with the young monk. Are the children all right? Pan Hong asked. The young masters and young ladies are all fine. The second young master is not injured. Eldest young master, you don't have to worry. 17 said and led the way. Behind them, the guards pushed the wheelchair and followed. When they arrived at the peach forest, the abbot, Pan Ning and the madam had already talked for a while. The abbot, who understood the situation, said softly, Amitabha. Everyone must be frightened. Please go back and rest. I'll take care of things here. Thank you, Master Abbot. The madam bowed slightly and thanked Pan Ning. I really have to thank the second young master today. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have survived today. When I go back, I'll definitely thank you with a generous gift. Madam Ho, you're too polite. Pan Ning hurriedly said. The Ho madam bowed again and left with the help of the pale-faced servant girl. These are men of sacrifice. Pan Hong glanced at the corpses on the ground and knew that these were not ordinary assassins, but men of sacrifice. They came for the madam. I just happened to meet them. Pan Ning said, Master, I'll leave the things here to you. We'll go back first. The abbot clasped his hands together and bowed slightly. After watching them leave, he looked at the corpses on the ground, and a thoughtful look flashed through his wise eyes. When they arrived at the courtyard, Pan Hong entered the side room and called out to Pan Ning, who was about to enter the room, come with me. Pan Ning's footsteps paused. He felt a little helpless. He knew that other people might believe those words, but his big brother definitely wouldn't. After entering the room, Pan Ning closed the door behind him. Two bodyguards stood outside and looked at his big brother. He then asked, Big brother, why did you call for me? Pan Hong poured a cup of tea and said, don't you think you should tell me about it? With your skills, how could you deal with a few dark guards alone without any injuries? Pan Ning remained silent, not knowing what to say. Pan Hong drank a cup of water and said, ever since you brought Hao, and the other two back, you've been hiding more and more things from us. You know that we're a family. Even if there's something you can't tell outsiders, can't you tell us? If this continues, have you ever thought that one day, you won't be able to protect them at all? Chapter 44-79. Hearing this, Pan Hong was shocked. What was the identity of the three children? How could they make him guard their identity and not mention a word? In that case, I only ask you one thing. At that time, I was diagnosed by the imperial physician and the doctor that I would not live past that night, but I survived. Was it Hao, and the others who saved me? This question had been hidden in his heart for a long time. He did not believe those words that were said to the outside world, but he knew that since Pan Ning said those words, it must be to cover up some truth. Therefore, he guessed that his survival had something to do with Hao, and the others. However, even if he guessed in his heart, even he was not willing to believe it. After all, the three of them were only children. Pan Ning looked at him for a long time, then took a deep breath and replied, yes. Pan Hong's eyes narrowed. Even if he had guessed it, his heart was still shocked when he heard him admit it. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled, saying, I know. You can go back. After encountering such a scene today, I guess they were frightened. Go and see them. Hearing this, Pan Ning secretly breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Even if his elder brother guessed that his survival had something to do with Hao, and the others, he would never have thought that the 3 children were already people who dared to kill. How could they be easily frightened? Just as he was about to go out, he heard his elder brother's voice behind him. Wait a moment. Pan Hong seemed to have just reacted. He glanced at him and asked hesitantly, those black-robed men couldn't have been killed by Hao, right? How could it be? Elder brother, I'll go first to see the children. Pan Ning turned back and smiled embarrassedly. Without waiting for him to say anything else, he quickly left. Seeing him like this, how could Pan Hong ask more? He just felt that it was inconceivable. In the room on the other side, the 6 children were all sitting in the room. Compared with Bowen, who had a more introverted personality, Bo Qing was like a little monkey walking around the room, looking at this and playing with that, and asking all kinds of questions. Yu obediently sat at the side of the table with her hands supporting her chin. Blinking her beautiful and pure eyes, she had an innocent appearance. No one would have thought that such a well-behaved, pure and harmless child would actually kill 3 specially trained death soldiers just a moment ago. Mu Chen sat by the side and didn't say anything. He just pursed his lips and listened to Bo Qing talk non-stop. From time to time, Shui would turn her head to look outside the room. Bowen sat there quietly, occasionally looking at Hao, who was sitting in the corner. No one knew what he was thinking. When Pan Ning walked in and saw that the children were all there, he said, You must be tired today, right? After the meal, let's all rest first. Tomorrow morning, we'll take a stroll around the temple. After lunch, we'll return. Other than Hao, and the other 2, Bowen and the other 2 didn't know what had happened. Hearing him say this, Bowen said, Second uncle, I heard from the monks in the temple that someone died at this time. That has nothing to do with us, and it has nothing to do with your children. Don't think too much about it. Alright, let's go. Let's go eat first. He said with a smile and looked at Hao, Mu Chen, and Yu. The children followed him to eat. By the time they returned, the sky was already dark. After freshening up, they returned to their rooms early to rest. Chapter 4480. Big brother, can we use the stick to ask when we're going home? Yu asked, holding her brother's hand on the left and her brother's hand on the right. You can shake it later and then take it to see if it's accurate. Hao said with a smile, holding her hand and walking slowly. Big brother, we are immortals. Why do we have to worship Buddha? Mu Chen asked, puzzled. They were obviously immortal cultivators. His brother also said that their parents were very powerful and were the monarchs of heaven and earth. Since that was the case, why did they still have to worship Buddha? Hao looked at the hall in front of them and said, We don't worship or kneel. We will only shake the stick. You have to remember that in this world, except for our parents and our elders, no one else is qualified to make us kneel and kowtow. Hearing this, Mu Chen and Mu Yu nodded and secretly remembered it in their hearts. Big brother, is Buddha powerful? Or immortals powerful? Why do people here only worship Buddha and not immortals? Yu asked curiously. Hao paused, thought for a moment and said, I don't know. When we see father and mother in the future, we will ask them. Okay. Yu asked with a smile. The 3 of them came to the hall. Perhaps because it was still early, other than the 3 of them, there was only the abbot, who they saw yesterday, standing in front of the lamp adding oil, and a middle-aged monk standing behind the abbot. Seeing them enter, the abbot and the monk glanced at them. This was the first time the middle-aged monk saw the 3 of them. He felt that these three children were born with the looks of dragons and phoenixes and were extremely outstanding. However, in the next moment, the three children's actions stunned him. After the three of them came in, they only bowed to the golden Buddha above the hall. Then the little girl went to the front and picked up a stick. She took out another stick and looked at it, puzzled, and asked, "Big brother, how do we shake this? There are only numbers on it and nothing else. Does this mean that the number is shaken out?" Looking at this scene, the middle-aged monk secretly shook his head and walked over, saying, "Which family are you children from? Why didn't you come with an adult?" He came to the three children and said, "How can you be so polite when you see Buddha? You have to kneel and make a wish with all your heart, then Buddha can hear your thoughts." Hearing this, blinked her eyes, then curiously asked, "Can he hear us?" If it was an adult who spoke like that, the middle-aged monk would have been enraged. However, it was a 3 or 4-year-old little girl who was blinking her pure and clear eyes at him curiously. He carefully explained, "My Buddha is everywhere. Naturally, he can hear it." Was dumbfounded, then asked, "Then how should I draw the lot? If I ask him how to get home, will he tell me?" To sign, you have to kneel down, put your palms together and make a wish in your heart. Kowtow 3 times, then pick up the bamboo stick and turn it 3 times. Hold it with both hands and gently shake it up and down until one of the words falls to the ground. The middle-aged monk chuckled. Looking at how adorable this little girl was and how innocent she was, he decided to teach her in detail. Understands. Chapter 4481. Hey, no. The middle-aged monk was about to speak when he was interrupted. Nothing. The abbot opened his mouth and shook his head slightly, indicating that he didn't need to say anything. The middle-aged monk was startled. After glancing at the abbot, he looked at the little girl who was shaking the stick. The stick made a sound as she shook it. The crisp sound echoed in the hall, one sound after another. The abbot also stepped forward and stood quietly at the side to watch. After a long time, a stick fell to the ground, and the stick container also stopped. Was happy. She smiled and picked up the stick. "Little benefactor, let this old monk help you solve the stick." The abbot stepped forward with a kind smile on his face. Yes, here." Handed the stick to him and looked at him with a pair of beautiful eyes. She asked with some expectation, "Can this tell me when we can go home and see father and mother?" The host smiled and looked at the bamboo stick. In the next moment, the smile on his face froze. He saw that this was an unmarked bamboo stick. He carefully looked at the other half of the bamboo stick again. There was still no sign on the front or back. Just as he was frowning, he saw that on the bamboo stick, there were golden words floating. Seeing this, he couldn't help but be shocked. Hiss. This. How can this be? The middle-aged monk was also shocked. He opened his eyes wide in disbelief. Generally, only the number was written on the bamboo stick, and then the corresponding number was taken. However, there was no sign on the bamboo stick. At this moment, lines of golden words appeared out of thin air. Even though he had stayed in the Emperor Temple for many years and solved the sticks for more than 20 years, he had never encountered such a shocking thing. Since they saw it, naturally saw it too. Looking at this scene, didn't say anything. He just glanced at it and then looked at the golden Buddha statue in the hall. He was also a little surprised. Immortal fetus is pregnant with a dragon and a phoenix is born. However, there is no fated star in the heavenly palace. It is difficult to survive. Let nature take its course and don't force it. The abbot softly read these words, but the hand holding the stick trembled slightly. Immortal fetus? No fated star. As listened to the host reading the lot, he raised his eyebrows and his cold little face turned frosty. He took a step forward and took the bamboo stick from the abbot's hand to read it again. He pursed his thin lips and looked at the abbot and the middle-aged monk. "It's best if you don't reveal a single word about what happened today," he said coldly and turned to lead Mu Chen and Mu Yu out of the room. Seeing them leave, the middle-aged monk took a deep breath and looked at the abbot. He wanted to ask, but he found that he couldn't speak. It was as if the words were stuck in his throat and he didn't know where to start. Today's matter had far exceeded his imagination. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have dared to believe that the Buddha had really made an appearance. But why was it such a little girl? And that poem. Abbot, the bamboo stick has been taken away by them. Only then did he realize that the bamboo stick with the Lord Buddha's spirit had been taken away by them. The abbot took a deep breath and suppressed the churning in his heart. He hurriedly went to the center of the hall and knelt down. Putting his hands together, he softly chanted, Amitabha. Chapter 4482. Seeing this, the middle-aged monk asked, "Abbot, that sign?" His voice paused, because he saw the abbot's gaze on him, making it difficult for him to continue his question. "Nothing, you must forget this matter. You need to know that there are some things that you and I should not know about," he said slowly. "But if we spread the news of the Buddha's manifestation, the incense in the Emperor Temple will be even more prosperous. Moreover, this is the first time the Buddha's manifestation in the temple's history. Are we going to suppress this matter just like that?" he said anxiously. He did not understand what the abbot was thinking. "Don't talk about this anymore," he said with a frown. He glanced at him and said, "Remember, don't tell anyone about this." As soon as he finished speaking, he walked out. Seeing the abbot leave, the middle-aged man opened his mouth, but in the end, he just sighed softly and shook his head. He walked to the corner and sat down beside the sign. No matter how he thought about it, he could not understand why Buddha would manifest to a little girl. On the other side, Mu Chen and Mu Yu looked at their big brother who was holding their hands as he strode forward. Seeing the cold aura on his body and his face colder than usual, they couldn't help but look at each other. "Big brother!" Yu called out. How stopped and looked at Yu then at Mu Chen. "Don't worry, I will protect you. I won't let anything happen to you." That talisman was extremely accurate, and it also caused a trace of anger to rise in his heart. What 9 deaths, 1 life and difficult to survive? What about letting nature take its course and not forcing it? He only knew that his mother had told him that man's will triumphed over nature. Moreover, his mother not only told him with words, but also with actions that man's will triumphed over nature. So, what let nature take its course and not forcing it, meant nothing to him. Mu Chen thought for a while and said, "Big brother, we will work hard to cultivate. When we are as powerful as you, even if there is danger, we will be able to protect ourselves." Yes, you too. You will not go out to play when she goes back. You will also work hard to cultivate. The little one hurriedly promised. Hearing their words, Hao suppressed the rising and falling emotions in his heart. After a while, he led the two to a pavilion and sat down. He said, "Big brother knows that Chen, and you, have always been very obedient and also worked very hard to cultivate. Big brother knows all about it. Big brother, hereafter we will never go to shake that lot again." Yu said, she didn't want Big brother to be very angry like just a moment ago. Hearing this, Hao rubbed her head and said, "Big brother will think of a way. Big brother will think of a way to let father and mother know that we are here." He looked at the sky and his thoughts became more and more determined. In the mortal world, he couldn't contact his parents with his communication jade. Even though he had recovered his cultivation strength and had the silver wolf as his companion, he couldn't return to the heavenly realm where they were originally from with his cultivation strength. However, if this continued, they might not be able to leave the mortal world for a few years or even 10 years. Pan Ning said that he had found traces of an immortal and had invited him to the imperial capital. Even if he did not expect much, he still had to go and see who it was. He had to think of a way to break this situation. "Big brother, do you still want this thing?" Yu pointed at that bamboo stick in his hand. Chapter 4483. When they arrived at the courtyard, they saw Pan Ning and others were eating breakfast. Seeing them come in, Pan Ning didn't ask much and just said, "Come and have some porridge. I'll take you around later." "Okay." Hao and others answered and walked forward to sit down. Pan Hong had already eaten and was sitting in the wheelchair reading a book. The children of Pan family saw them and asked in a low voice, "Where did you go early in the morning? Why didn't you call us?" "Brother took us to the temple, but there was nothing fun, so we came back," Yu said with a smile. For them, there was really no fun place in the temple. If there was a place for them to play freely, it was only the peach forest at the back of the mountain. However, someone died in the peach forest yesterday, so they wouldn't let them go again. But, the peaches in the peach forest were very good, so she wanted to pick some back. So, after they drank breakfast, they followed Pan Ning to stroll around. Until the time when they were about to leave, Yu pulled her brother and eldest brother and quietly walked away, and went to the back forest to pick a basket of peaches. Pan Ning and others were about to get on the carriage, but they saw that the 3 children of Pan family had already gotten on the carriage, but they didn't see Hao and others. They couldn't help but be surprised. They glanced around and saw that 17 was also missing, so they went to the carriage in front. "Eldest brother, I don't know where Hao and others went. I guess we have to wait for a while. You go and look for them. We'll wait here," Pan Hong said. "Okay." Pan Ning responded and turned around to look for it. Just then, he saw the 3 children running over with a basket of peaches. 17 followed behind them. Seeing this, he was slightly surprised. "You guys went to pick peaches?" We picked some back for great-grandfather and others to taste," Yu said with a smile. Hearing this, Pan Ning couldn't help but smile. He reached out and took the basket in Hao's hand and said, "Give it to me. Quickly get on the carriage, we're going back." "Okay." The 3 children answered and quickly got on the carriage. After they got on the carriage, 17 also got on and drove the carriage back. At the main gate of the Emperor Temple, the abbot slowly walked out. Looking at the carriage that was gradually disappearing into the distance, he put his palms together and said softly, "Amitabha." 2 days later, the Pan family welcomed Marquis Qi and his wife. The 2 of them came with gifts to express their gratitude for saving their lives in the Emperor Temple. In the main hall of the Pan family, a dignified man in his 30s looked at the Pan family's father and Pan Ning, who sat on his right. He smiled and said, "Second young master from the Emperor Temple saved my wife. We have always wanted to pay you a visit, but we have been investigating the Death Warrior for the past 2 days. We hope second young master won't take offense." "My lord, you're being too serious. It's just a small matter. How could I trouble my lord and madam to visit?" Pan Ning hurriedly said. "Ha ha ha, to be able to save Madam Ho is also fate. My lord, you don't have to take this to heart." Pan family's father smiled. He only knew that they had returned from the Emperor Temple. They said that something happened there and the second son happened to save Marquis Qi's wife. Hearing this, the Marquis smiled and paused for a moment. He said, "I heard from Madam that there is a pair of children who look exactly the same in your residence. They are extremely cute and outstanding. I wonder if my wife and I can go and see them." Chapter 4484. Pan Ning furrowed his brows and glanced at the madam. Obviously, the madam had told her husband about what happened at that time. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He should have known earlier. When the madam saw Pan Ning's slightly furrowed brows, her eyes couldn't help but flicker. She lowered her gaze and didn't look at him. The two children were so exquisite and outstanding that she liked them very much. Although she didn't go out these 2 days, she asked people to inquire about the news and found out that the two children were brought back by Pan Ning more than a year ago. He said that they were their distant relatives. However, after some investigation, they naturally found out that they weren't distant relatives as he said. However, what surprised her and her husband was that even with the influence of the Marquis's estate, they were actually unable to find out the origins of those two children. However, from the scene that day, she knew that those two children were not ordinary children. What's wrong? Is it inconvenient? Master Ho asked and looked at the two of them. Ha ha ha, it's not inconvenient. I'll ask someone to call them over. Master Pan said with a smile. He didn't think much of it. After all, Mu Chen and Mu Yu were very exquisite and it was normal for people to like them. No need to trouble yourself. Let's go and have a look. Master Ho stood up and said with a smile, it will be more or less restrained to let the children into the hall. Second young master, please take us over to have a look. Seeing this, Master Pan gestured, you take Master Ho and the others over. Treat them well and don't be rude. Hearing this, Pan Ning stood up and after answering, he said to the two of them, Master Ho, Madam Ho, this way please. At the same time, in the south courtyard, the three children were practicing in their rooms and didn't go out. Only 17 was guarding outside the courtyard. Second young master. 17 saw Pan Ning and stepped forward to bow. Go in and say that Master Ho and Madam are here for Chen, and Yu, Pan Ning gestured. Yes. 17 responded and turned to go in. Seeing this scene, Master Ho and Madam Ho felt a little strange. Master Ho looked at Pan Ning and said jokingly, could it be that without their permission, we can't enter the courtyard where they live? Pan Ning glanced at him and said, the three children live together in this courtyard. They don't like to be disturbed when they want to rest or study. That's why this rule was set. What a good personality. He smiled and saw two children of the same height and appearance walk out. When he saw the two children, his eyes couldn't help but light up. What an exquisite pair of children. He couldn't help but praise. His gaze fell on the two children and sized them up. The more he looked, the more surprised he was. The two children were no more than 3 or 4 years old. The little boy in the white robe had a noble aura about him, while the little girl in the pink dress had a spiritual aura about her. She looked very adorable. Uncle Ning. The two of them called out and looked at the two people at the side. This is the Lord Marquis and Lady Marquis. They said they wanted to come and see you. Pan Ning introduced them briefly and did not say anything else. Looking at the two children, Madam Ho couldn't help but smile. She squatted down and held Yu's little hand, saying, children, look what I brought for you. While speaking, she took out a box from her sleeve. When she opened the box, there were 2 luminous pearls the size of egg yolks inside. Chapter 4485. When Pan Ning saw the 2 luminous pearls, his eyes couldn't help but flicker with a touch of surprise. This luminous pearl was extremely precious and rare. He knew that His Majesty had once bestowed 2 to Chi Bohu, but he didn't expect that they would give it to Yu, and the rest. Seeing this, he glanced at Madam Ho and saw that she was looking at Yu, and Mu Chen with love in her eyes. He was relieved, but he still said, my lord, madam, this gift is too precious. It's okay. My wife likes these 2 children very much. She took a long time to choose from the storeroom before finally choosing this gift. Chi Bohu smiled and said, children like this kind of shiny things. Let them keep it. Mu Chen glanced at the pearl and thought, this luminous pearl is indeed small. The one in our space is much bigger than this. Yu took the box, but after looking at her brother, she shook her head and pushed back that night pearl box, and, "We can't accept this, our big brother said that we can't casually accept other people's things." After pushing the box back, she quickly hid behind her brother. Her eldest brother said that they were immortal cultivators and shouldn't accept too many favors because they have to return them. Madame Ho was startled and said, "It's okay, you can take it." "No, it's useless for us to take it," Mu Chen said with a straight face and put his hands behind his back, not wanting to take it. This was the first time they gave a luminous pearl and they couldn't give it away. For a moment, the couple was stunned. Pan Ning saw that the two children really didn't want it, so he said, "My lord, madam, the children are still young. It's not appropriate to give such a precious thing to them. You can keep it." Hearing this, Madame Ho had to keep the gift. She hesitated for a moment and asked with a trace of expectation, "Can I invite them to stay in our residence for a few days? I really like these two children." She looked at Pan Ning and said, "Second young master, you also know that my husband and I have been married for many years without children. It's rare to see such children, so I want to let them stay in our residence for a few days. Don't worry, I will treat them very well and send them back after a few days." "No." Before Pan Ning could speak, a cold voice directly rejected him. Hearing the voice, they looked in the direction of the voice and saw Hao Er walking out of the courtyard. His handsome little face was cold and stern. He glanced coldly at the two people and said to Mu Chen and Mu Yu, "Go back to your rooms." "All right." The two little fellows answered obediently and walked into the courtyard hand in hand. After entering the room, they closed the door and leaned against the door to eavesdrop on the conversation outside. Hao Er retracted his gaze and looked at Pan Ning. "Uncle Ning, we'll be studying by ourselves for a while. I don't want anyone to disturb us." Hearing this, Pan Ning hurriedly said, "Okay, I got it. I'll tell them later." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Hao Er turn around and enter the courtyard. At the same time, he instructed 17. "From today onwards, I won't see anyone, and there's no need to come in and report." "Yes." 17 noticed Hao Er's displeasure and immediately responded respectfully. Chapter 4486. "Yes." Pan Ning answered and said, "His name is Hao Er." Master Ho nodded and said thoughtfully, "This child doesn't look ordinary at all." Pan Ning didn't answer but said, "Master Ho, madam, why don't we have tea in the front hall?" "No, since they don't want to stay in our mansion, we won't stay for long." Master Ho smiled and said, "I'll ask madam to pick some toys that children like and send them over. We'll take our leave." Seeing this, Pan Ning sent them out. When he was about to go back, he saw his elder brother waiting for him in the front yard. "They came for you, Her?" Pan Hong asked and looked at him. "I guess Madam Ho said something to Master Ho. They said they liked the two children very much and wanted to take them to stay in the mansion for a while, but Hao Er directly refused." Pan Ning said. He paused and said, "But in my opinion, they don't have any other intentions. They just like the two children." Pan Hong nodded and said, "Marquis Qi and his wife have a good reputation in the capital. Even if they find something strange, they won't hold on to the children. But even so, we have to be careful." "I know. Hao Er just said not to disturb them during this period. I guess they won't go out for a while." The two brothers chatted for a while in the front yard. Then Pan Ning told people not to disturb them in the south yard. At the same time, he told the three children in the mansion not to look for Hao Er and the other two children during this period. In the next few days, Hao Er and the other two children practiced in the yard. Even the people in the mansion didn't know what they were busy with all day. They only knew that they almost didn't leave the room except for meals. Until one day, a piece of news came out from the Emperor Temple and caused a huge sensation in the capital. Have you heard? News came out from the Emperor Temple. A few days ago, Buddha showed himself and gave a spiritual stick. And it is said that the one who got the spiritual stick is a little girl of 3 or 4 years old. What? Spiritual stick? What kind of spiritual stick? Why is it a 3 or 4-year-old girl who begged for it? I heard that it was a white stick, but when the abbot held it in his hand, specks of golden light appeared on the white stick, and a few lines of words appeared. Furthermore, it was said that the little girl didn't even kneel and kowtow. She just stood there and begged for the spirit stick. However, this matter was suppressed by the abbot and only recently spread. Why did the abbot suppress it? How could it be leaked if it was suppressed? What was written on the paper? Who was that little girl? How can I get the Buddha Lord to show up? I heard that it was because the great Master Wu spoke in his sleep during the interpretation of the divination stick. Also, I heard that the little girl is not a mortal, but a divine fetus. It was said that the divination stick was written by Buddha. On the street, groups of 3 to 5 people were discussing in low voices. As the news spread, several versions of the same matter were spread. Some were true, and some were false. It was very suspicious. When the members of the Pan family heard the news, the father and son of the Pan family gathered in the main hall, looking at Pan Ning with serious expressions. Pan Ning's father asked, "What's going on? Why did such a rumor come out when you went to the Emperor Temple? Now it has spread outside, and the more it spreads, the more outrageous it becomes. His Majesty already knows about it and sent people to the Emperor Temple to invite the abbot and great Master Wu to the palace." Pan Hong frowned and thought deeply, "You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.